We have a roll call.
Commissioner Donaldson?
Here.
Commissioner Gunkel?
Here.
Commissioner Keller?
Here.
Commissioner Coomerly has an excused absence this evening. Commissioner Tan?
Here.
Vice Chair Moss?
Present.
Chair Cardoza?
Here.
We have a quorum of 6 commissioners.
Next item on the agenda will be the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I think we're going to
Next item on the agenda is election of officers. I would like to nominate Sean Moss for chairman and Carrie Tan for vice chairman.
I'd second that.
We have a roll call?
Any other nominations? Okay, you want a roll call? All right. Commissioner Donaldson?
Aye.
Commissioner Gunkel?
Aye.
Commissioner Keller?
Aye.
Commissioner Tan?
Aye. I can vote for myself. I can vote for myself? Okay.
Yes, you may.
Or I vote for Sean.
Yes, you just did.
I just did?
Vice, this is for both, right?
Yeah, I
Vice-
wasn't sure what we were
Vice
doing.
Chair Moss?
Aye.
And Chair Cardoza.
Aye.
So congratulations to Chair Moss and Vice Chair Tan.
Oh.
The deal is done.
Do this right now?
We're now the chair.
Okay.
At least you got y'all something set up there.
I can actually stay here. Yeah.
Buzz made the motion. Who seconded? Steve. Oh, Steve. Right. Okay.
They'll rearrange us next time. They'll rearrange us next time.
Yeah. So let's see.
Welcome to switch. No, I think we did that last time. We just.
Well, that was Brock.
This is Ruth's.
All right, so I guess the next item is public comment. So this is a time reserved for public comment for items that are not on our agenda tonight. So if anyone would like to speak on an item that is not on the agenda, please come forward.
Can I have the timer? Where's it? Okay, thank you.
My name is Paul Gerhardt, and I live at Pacific Park Plaza. And I recognize a few faces and some new faces. I don't know if you remember me from a couple of years ago with that whole debacle that we had over art.com sign. But I was here, I guess it was a couple years ago, with a large group of residents from Pacific Park Plaza. So really, basically, what just prompted me to come tonight, I saw on your agenda that you are reviewing some other signs that don't affect us at Pacific Park Plaza. But, my concern is in the future, if there's any other signage or any other activity going on the west side of Highway 80, please keep us in mind, even though some time has gone by. The art.com sign is still right in our face. It's there. The AAA sign, still right in our face. So, we're concerned and we're sensitive. I remember there was some talk about if there was some signage going in within 300 feet or 1,000 feet or something, you got some kind of special notice as a resident. That doesn't really, I think, pertain to us because, in art.com sign situation, a huge LED sign and a 30-story high-rise, that really wasn't applicable. So I'm just asking in the future if there's other, talk about signs that you consider us residents, again, at Pacific Park Plaza in the very early stages, so we can avoid that kind of debacle again. I remember one meeting we had like 4 or 5 lawyers here. There was so much time misspent, and if we could avoid all that, I think that would be, really to everybody's benefit. We're a small town. I think we can work together. So that's really my point, just to remember Pacific Park Plaza and the west side of Highway 80 in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on something that is not on the agenda? All right, seeing none, we will move on to adoption of the action recaps. We have 2 action recaps before us tonight. Our last meeting on May 17th and, or I'm sorry, a special meeting, which was a tour that we did on May 17th, and our last regular meeting on June 26th.
I'd move approval of the special meeting.
Second?
Okay, Commissioner Tan will need to abstain on that because she was absent from that meeting. Is that without objection then? So it'd be 5-0 and 1 abstention.
And I'd move approval of our regular meeting minutes.
I'll second that.
Is that without objection?
I have to abstain since I wasn't here
Oh, were you?
last.
You weren't
the
here last time
meeting.
either? Okay. So again, it's 5-0 with Commissioner Tan abstaining.
All right, then we will move on to the director's report.
All right. Well, first of all, congratulations to our new officers, Chair Moss and Vice Chair Tan. Let me tell you about what the City Council has done in the last month. They had 2 meetings on July 1st and July 15th. On July 1st, they took up the issue of the PRC, the general plan amendment and the rezoning for the PRC parking lot that you may recall you took up at your last meeting. The council passed the general plan amendment resolution, and they introduced the first reading of the rezoning ordinance on July 1st, and this was on a 3-to-1 vote with Mayor Asher voting no and Councilmember West recused. However, the second reading of the rezoning ordinance, which came back to them on July 15th, did not pass at that time because Councilmember Atkin was absent, and it takes 3 votes to pass an ordinance, so they, in fact, did not vote at all. They just put the matter over until their next regular meeting on September 2nd. The council also took up the matter of the impact fees, the proposed development impact fees. On July 1st, they held a public hearing on the proposed affordable housing, park and recreation, and transportation impact fees, and they introduced the first reading of the 2 ordinances amending the planning regulations to enable these fees, which you may recall you voted to recommend approval of at your last meeting. The ordinances were passed and the fees were adopted at the July 15th meeting, and they will take effect on September 13th. Also on July 15th, in addition to the PRC matter and the impact fees, they approved what's called a finding of public convenience or necessity for the Scarlet City Cafe. This is for the State Alcoholic Beverage Control Department to issue a license for them to sell beer at this new cafe that's going to be on the ground floor of the Key Route Lofts at Yerba Buena and Adeline Street. They held a public hearing on a proposed city charter and considered the polling results that indicate an overall very favorable attitude of the residents of Emeryville towards city services and a high likelihood that the proposed charter will pass in November. The council also discussed the proposed real estate transfer tax that is to be on the ballot in November with the charter, and they decided to simplify it and make it simply a straight $12 per thousand rate with no minimums and no tiering. They considered a requested noise waiver for weekend construction work at the what is now called the Park on Powell project, formerly Parkside, and they denied that request, which was the staff recommendation. They approved the draft housing element for submission to the State Department of Housing and Community Development for a compliance review. There was a proposal during the council deliberation to consider a rent stabilization board as part of the housing element, and rather than put that in the draft housing element at this time, they referred it to the housing committee for consideration. They considered a couple of matters under the Transportation Committee report. First, they gave direction for community meetings in September for traffic calming treatments for the Horton Street Bicycle Boulevard. And they also approved the city's first bicycle corral, which, as you may know, is taking a couple of on-street car parking spaces and converting it to bicycle parking. And that will be in front of the future Commonwealth Cafe on Adeline Street, where Cafe Beer used to be. Or there was another one since then, Ferunzo or something like that. Anyway, you know where it is, on Adeline between Yerba Buena and 40th. So that's it for the council actions. In other news, a couple of other items. As you may have heard, concerning the 6701 Shellman Street project, Avalon Bay's proposal for 211-unit residential project that you've had a couple of study sessions on at the Nady site has been withdrawn. They are no longer in contract to buy that property, and thus we have terminated the public review period that had been ongoing for the initial study and mitigated negative declaration. Mr. Nady has indicated that he would now like to go forward with the project as the applicant. This will require a new application from him, which we have not yet received. If and when a new application is received, we will determine at that time how to deal with the CEQA process going forward. The soonest that this project is likely to be back before the commission would be at your December meeting at the earliest. So stay tuned on that one. And finally, in some good news, or I think it's good news, depending on how you look at it, all items that had previously been scheduled for your August 28th meeting have now been continued to future meetings, leaving nothing for the August agenda. Therefore, unless you have an objection, we would plan to cancel the August meeting so that the Planning Commission, like the City Council, can take an August recess. And if that meeting is canceled, your next meeting would be October 2nd, which, as you may recall, is actually your regular September meeting, but it was moved back 1 week to avoid a conflict with Rosh Hashanah. So there would be 2 meetings in October, one on the 2nd and one on the 30th. So your next meeting after tonight would be October 2nd. Anyone have any problem with us canceling the August meeting? All right, well, enjoy your break, and we'll see you on October 2nd after tonight. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to respond to any questions you may have.
Charlie, was any CEQA work commenced on the Nady project before the application was withdrawn?
Yes, we had an ISMND out for public review and comment.
Oh.
It was in the middle of the 30-day public comment period, which I believe was to end on July 8th. And we learned about this on July 1st, I think. So we just terminated it in the middle of the public comment period.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Charlie, on the development fees, if someone were to pull a permit before the September date that they go into effect, will they be paying those fees?
No, they would pay the current traffic impact fee only.
So has the Hyatt pulled any permits yet?
No, they haven't even submitted an application.
Jeez. Okay.
It's unlikely they will pull a permit
Yeah, I
before
doubt it.
September 15th. Okay.
All right, well then if there are no other questions, we will move on to our public hearings for the night. So the first hearing is the East Bay Bridge Facade Improvements. Can we have the staff report, please?
Good evening, Commissioners. Right. So tonight we are revisiting the East Bay Bridge Facade Improvement application for 3839 Emery Street to modify an existing facade. The site location of 3839 Emery Street is part of the East Bay Bridge Center. It's just west of Emery Street, which is over here, and 40th runs to the north of it along here. For project overview, this application includes facade modifications, new landscaping, 14 new bike racks for the capacity of 28 bicycles, additional lighting, and the narrowing of the main traffic aisle. What this application does not include is changes to the building footprint, changes to the parking lot, or new signage at this time. Although as part of the conditions of approval for this project, there's a requirement that a new master sign program be submitted, since the facades, if approved, will change how the signs area is set up. So at the April 24th meeting, planning commissioners provided feedback on this project. One of the items they mentioned was higher quality design for materials and landscaping. You also recommended improvements to the western portion of the project, where the plaza area is located by the smaller stores. The facade area in front of a large retail, it was recommended that that area be removed of obstructions to create a pedestrian promenade area directly in front of the buildings, underneath the awnings. There was also concern about high vehicle speeds on the main traffic aisle directly in front of the facade area, that the intersection to the west of the project, closer to those smaller stores and plaza area, that it was problematic and that needed to be addressed. And it was also requested to look at parking lot improvements for lighting and landscaping and safety. In response to those requests and feedback from the Planning Commission, the applicant has addressed higher quality design by providing new canvas awning material. If you like, on the dais, there is a new materials board. Please be very careful with the metal, the corrugated metal, or not corrugated, the perforated metal there. It's really sharp on the side. So, but that's the new revised board. I do have the old board here for your reference if you would like it. Also, regarding the design, more landscaping has been added. The plans are more detailed. It provides a pedestrian buffer for the promenade that I mentioned before, and also is lines either side of the proposed drive aisle, or modified drive aisle, rather. Improvements to the western portion include new small storefront awnings, cleaning up the storefront area, and new plaza features, which includes additional landscaping as well. And the facade area in front of the large retail, as requested, has been removed of obstructions, and the bicycle racks have been relocated. To address the high vehicle speeds on the main traffic aisle, the traffic aisle has been narrowed by adding planters to the end of the parking aisles. And we'll look at that in more detail. All of this we'll look in more detail. To address the western intersection, the stop signs are proposed to be relocated. We'll look at that also. And parking lot improvements, there was a lighting survey done, a speed survey done, and landscaping islands will be added to the end of those parking aisles, as I mentioned. The applicant will talk in more depth about the lighting survey and the speed survey. For project overview, this is the daytime. At the very top, there's the existing conditions. In the middle is proposed elevation, and at the bottom is an overhead view. This is the nighttime elevation at the top, and then a lighting example at the bottom. So moving from the east to the west, the project has the highest elevation of the facade on the east side and tiers down towards the west, similar, or the same actually as the what you saw in April. So this what's called large retail A is the most eastern portion of the project. It includes those materials that are found on that board that's up on the dais. And all of the colors that are included for the large retail correlate to the tenants that are anticipated to go in there. As you can see, the landscaping has been added to the front. And one of the concerns last time was around the corner here, that there was not details on the planter area and what was happening with that. It wasn't clear. So there's some minor modifications planned for this area, but essentially this is an area, whoa, sorry about that. Essentially this is an area of transition, to transition from the new plantings on this block to the existing plantings across the street on the other side of Emery. Here is the nighttime view with the lighting. So retail tenant B, which is mid-block, just west of retail tenant A, which you saw, has a slightly shorter tenant facade area and different color scheme. Here's a night view of retail B. Sports Authority, which is a tenant that will remain, is mid-block, closest, is the largest retail tenant closest to the small stores on the western portion of this project. And there's a nighttime view of that. And then the smaller retail area since last time has the most significant changes. Landscaping has been added to wrap around the corner. And here's an overhead view as well as an elevation. The windows are proposed to be cleaned and modified. New awnings are supposed to go in. The entire project, your concerns about pigeons have been addressed with inclusion of shock tape in the conditions of approval. There's also pedestrian street furniture with tables and chairs. There's additional lighting that's hard to see in this view, but there's two pedestrian lighting sticks that stick up in the middle here. Here's a view from the evening. You can see it better there, the light shining down in the middle of the plaza. In regards to intersection improvements, the applicant is proposing two things, only one of which we'll discuss tonight. This area up here is in response to Fair and Peers looking at the area and suggesting that some signage might help better direct traffic. But as part of that master sign program I mentioned that's required as part of the conditions approval, that signage would be included in that application and so is not going to be discussed here, but I'm mentioning it since it was part of the traffic study that they did. Over here is the intersection that was discussed as being problematic. So this block here is the Home Depot block. And then over here to the east is the block in question. This is the pedestrian plaza that we're actually looking at tonight. So the existing stop signs are the location of these little red blocks. The issue right here is that it's aligned with this parking aisle. It's not aligned with this, which is where the street comes in from 40th. So the proposal is to shift the stop signs over. This is the existing outline, shifting it so that the stop signs are now aligned with the main entrance from 40th Street. For the traffic aisle improvement, the existing traffic aisle is 30 feet in width. What the applicant is proposing to do is add 6-foot landscape planters, pardon me, at the end, I apologize. Whoa. At the end of each of the parking aisles to effectively narrow the traffic aisle to a width of 24 feet with the intention of slowing traffic by narrowing the lanes. For pedestrian improvements, as I mentioned before, they've cleared the area in front of the facade to create a pedestrian promenade. And all of the features such as bike parking, benches, are moved out of this area. Speaking of bicycle parking, they've moved them out, as I said, into 4 different areas. These are just colored to help draw the eye since it's a little bit difficult to see. They're clustered relatively near each retail location with 4 spaces. That would be 2 bike racks by retail A, 5 parking, I apologize, 5 bike racks for 10 spaces between retail A and B. By Sports Authority, another 5 racks for 10 spaces, and then by the small stores, 2 racks for 4 spaces. At the bottom of the screen, these are the bike racks the applicant is proposing to use. They are consistent with our bicycle rack guidelines in the planning regulations. So an error is in the conditions of approval. It says 28 short-term and 9 long-term bike racks. This is supposed to say bicycle parking spaces. If it's kept as bike racks, it's effectively doubling the amount of required bike parking space because each rack holds 2 bikes. So the revised language would be to change bike racks to bicycle parking spaces to clarify what the requirements are. The requirements that you see, 28 short-term and 9 long-term spaces, are consistent with the regulations of new requirements for biking at, I'm sorry, are consistent with the planning regulations for required bike parking spaces. So conforming to major design review, this project is consistent with the general plan and the urban design goals. It's also consistent with Emeryville design guidelines and is of high design quality. For the general plan design goals, UDG 19, high quality, facade improvements, modify and integrate existing building features. UDP 14 establishes a more urban character at the East BayBridge district by having a more articulated facade, improving the landscape, and having a more pedestrian-friendly environment. UDP 24, pedestrian priority zone. It has a new landscape buffer between the sidewalk and traffic area, and landscaping also narrows the main traffic aisle. And UDP 33 prevents bulky and monolithic buildings. The new facade breaks up the existing building into more articulated facade. The Emeryville design guidelines, A10 support various modes of travel. There's improved bicycle amenities and also improved pedestrian area underneath the awnings as a promenade. And A13, generous planting strips and large healthy trees. So there's a significant increase in planting, and trees are part of that. E6, use 3D elements such as awning, facade variation, horizontal articulation, all of which are included in this. Wide and continuous sidewalks conform to minimum sidewalk width, and these plans do that by clearing the promenade. Effectively does this. And staff finds this to be of high design quality that's compatible with the surrounding area and does not adversely affect the surrounding area. So staff recommends approval this evening. The applicants are available to answer questions. They also have a presentation, and I'm also available to answer questions.
Are there any questions for staff? All right, then at this time, we'd like to invite the applicant up.
Want this one?
Good evening. My name is Marty Potts, MPA, San Jose, California. I'm here, pleased to be here tonight to present to you what we believe to be a very most responsive solution to the East BayBridge Shopping Center. We've come a long way since being before you back in April, in receiving your really, I think, terrific design input. We're very optimistic after hearing our presentation before you this evening that you'll recognize that we've taken the comments very, very seriously and best incorporated into the project. First, I want to thank staff, particularly Sarah, for a great presentation. It was very thorough. Appreciate your guidance and input. We agree with the staff report and the conditions that are contained therein. And I also want to thank the commissioners. I know several of you took time to meet with us. Really, really appreciate the time. I know everybody's very, very busy. And why is that flipping around? Very, very busy. But we appreciate your input and your guidance. With me tonight, I'm not alone, is Michael Strauss with Federal Realty, the developer and owner of the property. Our architect, Rob Anderson, and Gabby Blackburn of Field Paoli. Jamie Beckman with Carducci and Associates, our landscape architect, and our traffic engineer, Ryan McLean with Fair and Piers. Following the presentation, if there's any particular questions for any one of those design disciplines, we're here to certainly address them all. Before I get started with the project, a little background with Federal Realty. They're a national REIT, real estate investment trust, headquartered in Maryland, with their West Coast operations anchored in San Jose. Federal is most well known for its exemplary mixed-use developments, and they own several retail shopping centers across the country. Their most noteworthy project that they own here is in San Jose, Santana Row, which is really a national benchmark for mixed-use developments throughout the country. About 18 months ago, Federal acquired East BayBridge property with a vision of enhancing its retail program, creating a more vibrant and exciting experience for the shoppers. This design proposal, solely driven by the desire of new quality retailers to make Emeryville their home, is the first of many steps to revitalize this shopping center. But as any good developer, we must be prudent and fiscally wise as to what can be done and when. Okay, how do we get this thing going? Oh, it's easy here. Thank you. We're pleased to announce that Nordstrom Rack and Ulta Cosmetics will soon populate the retail landscape where Pacific Sales and Office Max are currently located. Nordstrom Rack and Ulta Cosmetics many times go hand in hand because they're great complementary shopping experiences as retailers. But when you really look at the proposal this evening, we're replacing 2 out of the 20 tenants in the shopping center, which Federal controls. That's 48,000 square feet out of a total 438,000 square feet. The design proposal for you tonight is motivated by bringing these great retailers to the project and strengthening the fabric of the shopping center. But as part of the lure in capturing Nordstrom Rack and Ulta was their need to have retail identity present, which is really the basis of this design proposal. Given that we're merely changing 11% of the tenants in the shopping center that we control, it does not support really much more renovation than what we're proposing this evening. We've expanded the proposed design improvement far beyond these buildings and have stretched the envelope pretty much as far as we can take it, but while continuing to be fiscally responsible and budget sensitive. When we were before you in April, we generally took away from the following key design concerns. Not enough pedestrian design change. Pedestrian experience was poor. Create an overall stronger, more vibrant design, improving the customer shopping experience. The small shops were dismal. Lighting coordination with the building and landscaping seemed to be missing. The safety of the main entry road fronting the buildings. And the concern of the intersection at Home Depot and Starbucks. Our focus was then, and continues to remain, the building edge. The overall parking lot is not changing. The parking quantities are not being modified. The circulation is not being modified. There is considerable landscaping, however, being added, which we'll speak about in a few minutes. If you look up at on the screen, you have Nordstrom Rack in red, and just to the west of that is going to be Ulta between Nordstrom Rack and the existing Sports Authority. The design of the shopping center currently is considerably industrial, which certainly falls within the landscape of the surrounding areas, and East Bay Bridge is really no exception. The design proposed tonight is a merging of this existing industrial design landscape of Emeryville with the softer fabric of the retailers. As shown in the elevation comparison, with the top photo being the existing building and the bottom photo, or bottom rendering, I should say, being the proposed design, you'll see that the retail overlay fabric, there's a considerable design transformation. While the existing buildings serve as the canvas, new entry portals to each one of the retailers enhance their entries and identifies their personality, with the portals designed in shape and form to be consistent with the industrial vocabulary of the balance of the project. Overall building colors are enhanced, are more vibrant. And there's a proposal to replace the existing canopies with colorful canvas awnings along the entire elevation to soften the harshness of the building and provide a lantern or a halo effect through dramatic lighting at night. The first building I'll talk about is Nordstrom Rack, which is where Pacific Sales is at right now. Their entry is considerably redesigned, and it has been slightly modified from their prototypical. This elevation transcends what Nordstrom Rack believes is their personality and their identity. Each entry to the retailers have enhanced hardscape, but a little bit different than what's in your staff report this evening, and what you see in the presentation tonight is a slight modification to the Nordstrom portal, and that is that we've brought down on the left side of the building you'll see the horizontal blue banding, which is a material that we brought down to the ground to give the elevation more balance. This elevation is Sports Authority. Sports Authority is existing. They're not going anywhere. They're remaining, but we felt that it was important to take this and give it more life and more vibrancy, similar to what we're doing for Nordstrom Rack and Ulta Cosmetics. As Sarah mentioned in her proposal, the biggest change has happened at the small shop tenants. We've been very, very challenged in this area because while we want to create a very nice experience for our customers who come to the shopping center, we also have to be very, very careful that we discourage any after-hours nuisances. The buildings are going to be repainted. The storefront glass is going to be repaired, cleaned. New awnings are going to be replaced. But that's just the beginning of what we're doing to these buildings. This building, I should say. The people space is really, it's going to be its attraction. We are segregating the vehicle driveway with a 10-foot landscape berm to create an enclave area where customers can come sit, relax, enjoy a cup of coffee, read the newspaper, visit, chat, and feel a little bit segregated from the hustle and bustle of the rest of the shopping center. It's going to be considerably illuminated at night, and with wall packs on the building, pedestrian pole lights in the middle of the plaza, which are all part of the staff report package you have in detail, and we can talk about those if you have any questions. The overall customer experience. In any retail shopping center, any retailer will tell you customers have to get to our stores as easy as possible. It's about convenience. This parking lot has direct access from the parking bays directly up into the stores, and all the design efforts that have been placed in the sidewalk has been respectful of making sure that customers have direct access without having to parallel the traffic lane in front of the buildings, as shown in the blue arrows in the exhibit in front of you. The sidewalk in its entirety has been extremely and heavily upgraded. Landscaping along the sidewalk curb on the street edge has been added pretty much opposite every bulb out that has been created in the parking lot at the end of the parking aisles. We've added mid-block gardens that are going to house seating, bike racks, sort of places just to sort of hang out if someone wants to relax. And we've continued to maintain an unobstructed sidewalk, building adjacent, all the way down in front of the building. So while one gets up on the sidewalk, they can cross shop from building to building without having to engage in any of the vehicular traffic. You'll see in these photos, and this happens throughout the project in front of the small shops as well, is there are some large planters, concrete planters that are elevated. They are going to be gone and removed. It's proposed that the entire walkway be weather protected with canvas awnings all the way down. This slide includes the vocabulary of all the hardscape treatments, furnishings, benches, trees that are going to be put into the project. The landscaping has been chosen to be indigenous to the Bay Area and drought tolerant. Sweet gum and ornamental pear trees are proposed in the sidewalks and in the bulb out planters. Shrubs of various colors and textures while having low maintenance and water use. And vines are proposed to be attached to the steel structure and to the portals to soften the effect as they reach the pedestrian level. We've given considerable thought to how we want the front of these buildings to be illuminated. As important as they are during the day, they're equally important at night. We've carefully planned, and there's a couple of sections that are shown here tonight, we've carefully planned the location of where we're putting lights. At the entries of each tenant under the portals will be downlights. The awnings will have lights that will be concealed on the steel beam at the bottom of the awning that shine back at the sidewalk, and then one up high that shines on the face of the awning. Along the building, we'll have lights that shine behind the awnings and at night provide that lantern effect of the awnings. We've carefully planned this so that we can be certain that we don't have any glare or seeing any light sources from any of the public areas. Although if somebody's standing under the building and look back, they're going to see something, but as they approach the building, you won't see any light source and you just see the glow of the light. There was a lot of discussion last time we were here regarding the traffic speeds along the frontage road. There was discussion about speed ramps or speed humps, speed bumps, bulb outs, striping, and after consideration with Farron Piers, our traffic engineer, the proposal is to reduce the existing 30-foot wide street to 24 feet. In a result, that will have a calming or a slowing of vehicles as it's narrowed. And the thought was not to stripe the middle of the road, because a stripe down the center line of the road provides a vehicle with a sense of security and safety. So it's all in an effort to slow traffic down. As I said earlier, there's bulb outs in each one that are densely landscaped. So we believe that this is going to be successful in reducing vehicular traffic. This is a view of the street as it exists today in the picture, to what it's going to appear with our proposal. And you can see how landscaped it is on either side. When I drove through the center this evening before coming here, I noticed there were 2 cars that were parked on along the fire lane red curb, and partially still allowing 2 lanes of two-way traffic getting by them. And I think by narrowing this down, that will help eliminate that, as well as adding the planters will help eliminate not loading in the front of the project. I know this is a little small compared to the slide that Sarah presented you earlier this evening, but the extension of Harlan Street from 40th into the project, it became very, very clear after studying the vehicular traffic circulation at the intersection as it approaches Home Depot, with the pedestrian crossing that was definitely a conflict. The solution became kind of elementary. Adjust the driveway to move the intersection over to the main street that comes into the project. The street that comes down off the detail to the bottom to the south is really nothing more than a service drive that goes behind the Sports Authority building and Home Depot building. There's very, very little traffic on it. We believe this is the right solution. In addition, signage is proposed to alert vehicles. I can't say direct them because they have choices, but to alert a vehicle that as they enter the project from 40th Street, they have the opportunity to turn right or left and backload the parking lot, versus getting in front of going all the way to the front and then traversing in front of the buildings and then front loading the parking lot. There was a suggestion made, and I think a very good one, that there be a sign added to prevent vehicles who come southbound on Harlan before they get into the shopping center. One might think there's parking by turning right into the residential area. There's no outlet. It's a dead-end parking area, so we want to post a sign there that says no outlet or shopping center parking to prevent that from happening. There is a condition of approval, and we're very fine with it, to introduce bird prevention control devices through the project. Horizontal surfaces will be treated to prevent birds as best we can. I mean, you can never eliminate all of them, but we can certainly detract most of them. Yeah, it's a detail that might bore you. So in conclusion, our team is very pleased with the outcome of our design efforts over the last 3 months after being with you in front of you back in April. We believe the design upgrades to this project are a terrific addition to the city's retail landscape. These tenant leases are executed, Nordstrom Rack and Ulta. We intend to immediately move forward upon your approval with our building plans, permits, and construction to deliver these tenants and have them open as soon as possible. We seek your approval tonight of our application as conditioned in the staff report, and we're here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Are there any questions of the applicant?
I have a couple. The existing building along the steel facade, there are diagonal braces, I think, in every bay. And there are also vertical members. And I don't see any of that in any of your renderings for the improvements. And I was wondering, are you planning on removing those, or are they just not showing up in the renderings?
They're being removed.
All right.
Okay. I actually had the same question, so thanks for asking that. The question I have, so in the same section of the development that Commissioner Gunkel was just talking about, in the drawing is the perspective view from the northwest, and I'll take a look at that.
That view?
No, it's actually in our packet. Yes, right there. So in addition to the cross bracing being gone, I was wondering if the window mullions and the window framing on these other smaller retail spaces, are they being painted? Because in this rendering, it looks a lot less shiny than it is in real life. So I just was curious if you're planning on knocking that down a bit with a gray or a darker color similar to the awning.
They will be painted.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I have.
Actually, I have a couple more. I saw in the packet that the vines are being trained to climb the steel. How are you doing that? Is it with wire or?
They'll typically be either a wire or like a fish line with an eyelet that attaches to the wall, and the vines then grow up on them. If you talk to them nice, they move faster. But I'm just kidding. But it's you have the maintenance on them. It takes a while to get them up there, but they're actually attached to it by hand. But the wires are put on the portal, I don't know. We haven't figured out the detail of how we do it on the steel. But on the portal, there'll be like eyelets on it or tabs, in which like a fishing line that you don't really see is attached, and then the vine grows up on it.
And then, have you used this Ottawa light column on other projects, and how durable is it?
I have not used it. I'd have to defer to the designer to answer that. I'm not familiar with it. We believe it's a good solution because it doesn't. It's kind of it's not very ornate. It's very streamlined. Shopping centers take a tremendous amount of abuse, so we expect that it's going to be durable. But I've not used them before. No. Is there a better answer than that?
No, we're just looking. I believe it's a cast aluminum, cast iron.
You need to come up and use the microphone, please.
Rob Anderson, Field Paoli Architects. This is a cast element, so it's very durable. It's made to take a high degree of abuse. And we generally vet these through a national group that helps us select light fixtures for, high use, heavily used retail environments. And he was very comfortable with that as a very durable element.
While you're still there, I have a question for you. So there's an LED light feature that's at the Nordstrom rack entrance, correct?
Yes.
And is that dimmable? Are those lights dimmable? I think that was something that we talked about during our initial review.
I believe, did we talk about that? Dimming it? I believe that the LEDs are dimmable. I mean, it's something I can look at, but I'm pretty sure that we can control the intensity of those lights.
I would have the same concern about the awning lighting. The LED strips behind the awnings would want to make sure that those are dimmable as well.
All right. I think the answer would be the same there.
Chair Moss. Just a note from staff. We did remember to put in the condition about dimmable lights in the 2 Park on Powell applications that you'll be looking at next, but in looking at this, it appears that we neglected to include it in this one. So if you like, we can add that, what has essentially become a standard condition about dimming lights if they're too bright to the director's satisfaction.
Right.
That would be good.
Any other questions of the applicant?
I just have a quick question. It might be for your landscape person. Are any of the added landscape planters at the end of the parking stalls acting as bioswales or anything for stormwater treatment?
Yeah, my name's Jamie Beckman with Carducci. We are using them as best management practices for stormwater, not technically biofiltration, because we don't really have the infrastructure to actually construct the biofiltration as it would need to be.
Okay.
But we are using them as sort of flow-through planters.
Catchments, and they'll flow through and stuff.
It'll flow through. We'll percolate what we can, and what doesn't, we'll filter through the planting and into the storm drain, as it currently does now. We're just sort of...
Which is an improvement over what we have.
Exactly. We're going to treat it as best we can, and then as it flows through, and then into the storm drain.
Good.
I have a couple of questions, though. In terms of the design guidelines that are mentioned here in the staff report talk about the rootable soil volumes, and there's a note from Stephen Batchelder about 36-inch structural soil or silvicells. I just want to make sure that that does comply with our minimum rootable soil volume standards that we have, because I know that the dirt around that area is awful, awful. And I want to make sure that the trees actually
Sarah
grow.
And I actually talked a lot about that, and we volume-wise, we're exceeding, I think is what we figured out, right? We did the calculations.
It will also be in the building plans. It will all be checked at that time to make sure it's consistent with our water efficient landscaping requirements, and our WELO requirements, which require a volume based on tree size. So, yeah.
And I am a little bit concerned about the pyrus, because we've been having lots of problems with fire blight around here, and the pyrus are really susceptible to that. So
Sure.
if you looked at switching those out, that could be a good thing.
And if that comes as a condition, we definitely will look at it. We just felt like it was a lacy enough tree for a retail environment with some good color and flower. So, but if we
Yeah,
can
they've
definitely look
generally
at it.
been handsome trees, but they've been having some problems.
And that's good to know, because we're as well informed as we like to be. We're not quite up on all the sort of the pests in the microclimates of the Bay Area. So.
I have one question for you. I appreciate the way that you've done it, the way that the drive aisle has been narrowed, sort of on the side, adding the planters on the side away from the building. I'm just curious if there's any reason that couldn't be narrowed on the other side. Those planters moved to the other side as additional landscaping on that side.
We were trying to be a little bit of economical judiciousness, I guess, so to speak. We were trying to kind of keep the curb line at the building the same, what it was. We're probably not going to reconstruct that curb. So curb in was where we were focused, but we felt like the better bang for our buck to add landscape holistically along the whole drive was to use every end island, and that gave us a little bit of area to add trees that aren't currently there. So we wouldn't probably add more trees on the building side, which is what effectively allowed us to do on the other side of the driveway. So, but I mean, it's an interesting idea.
Thanks. Any other questions? All right, then we will go ahead and open the public hearing. If there's anyone who would like to speak on this item, please come forward. All right, seeing none, we will close the public hearing. And we will bring this back to the commission for discussion. I think before we get going on discussion, I think this would be a good time to just go around and disclose anything that we might have. I actually have a couple of things, so I don't mind getting us started. So 2 things.
I live more than 500 feet from this project, but I am a member of an HOA which owns property within 500 feet of this project. There are some changes to FPPC regulations that were recently adopted that allow me to vote on the project, so I will be remaining here to do that. And then my other disclosure is that I did meet with the applicant last week. Does anybody else have anything?
I also met with the applicant last week.
And I met with the applicant on the 16th.
All right, then I think we can just go around and discuss. Who would like to start us off?
I just have a couple of questions. Charlie, we talked about the bicycle parking outside. I didn't notice anything in the conditions, or I may have just overlooked it, but they talked about inside parking for, I guess, long-term staff. So how do since we're not seeing the inside plans, how do we guarantee that those spots are going to be there?
In that condition of approval that needs to be modified, it says 28 short-term and 9 long-term spaces. So the 9 long-term spaces will be part of the tenant improvements for the 2 new retail locations for the retail A and B, or Nordstrom and Ulta. So those can't be shown on the plans now because we don't have the tenant improvements for it, but it is part of this condition of approval.
It is condition, okay. Okay, and the others are just the comments overall on the project is, I really like the improvements. I think it's a lot better than what we have compared to what is done at Safeway Pack and Save. You know, there was some improvements there that definitely made the place better, but it wasn't a wholesale improvement of the whole center. I think this is moving that direction. I want to keep in mind that we still have Home Depot in that same location that's not doing anything at this time. I do think it's important that you're doing the direct access. I liked how you showed how everyone, no matter what parking lane they park in, they're going to walk into the building, because if you don't create a path, the pedestrians and the people will. So it'll become trampled, you know, your landscape and stuff. So we may not have a full lush landscape along the front of that, but I think it's important to have those penetrations so people can go to the stores and not trample the plants to get there. I am a little disappointed in the bike lockers not being included. I understand the reason, but being a person who's buying a bike that now will cost a couple $1,000s, I don't feel really comfortable parking it outside there, and I would prefer it to be in a bike link locker. But it's certainly not going to be something that I'm going to vote against just because of that. But I'd like to see the city make a stronger case for us making bike links, at least 2 or 3 within a project, something that we consider as a condition of approval. And that's all my comments.
Well, I think this is a vast improvement of what we saw before, and I'm glad to hear that we are going to have dimmable lights, and that's going to be a condition.
Yeah, I too want to thank the applicant for the work they've done since we last met. I think the changes are really positive. I do really like the changes to the landscaping. Changes sort of, I really like the changes to the area in front of the smaller shops and the addition of the outdoor seating and the umbrellas. I think that's really going to strengthen that area, make it a much more usable and used area. And the narrowing of the drive aisle is also a positive change. That said, I still am really concerned about the architecture. I just don't think it's good architecture. It's really, you know, I think, as I said at the last meeting, the Nordstrom's rack sort of facade entrance looks really dated, and the other entrances are just very plain. And so I think even with all of these really positive changes, I still have a really hard time making the finding that this project is of a high design quality. I think there are definitely elements of it that are of a high design quality. I think the landscaping is
a vast improvement, and is, you know, definitely there since the last time we saw this, but I just still have a lot of concerns about the actual facade improvements themselves. I don't think they're of good design.
Well, I also think it's come a long way since the last time. I like the improvements to the pedestrian plaza that are being shown, and I really appreciate the addition of the trees, because that parking lot and that shopping center has been really devoid of anything green for a long time, and I would hope that as you go forward, you get more trees out in the parking lot, or I don't know whether you're going to redevelop that with structured parking at some time, but definitely it's been something that the Planning Commission has been, in all of the years that I've been on, it's come up over and over and over again that can't we get some more trees in that parking lot? So this is a little nudge in the right direction.
I too want to thank the applicant for taking our comments into consideration and really striving to make some improvements. I too think that the design has come, quite a ways from what it was a few months ago. I really think that the landscape improvements on the Emery Street side and the vines on the frontage are definitely moving in the positive direction. I was thinking, though, and maybe we can go back a few slides to where you're seeing the Emery Street, so across from Pack and Save. Okay, go forward one more. Yeah, so right there, I think you mentioned that as far as the landscape improvements, or I think, Sarah, you mentioned that they were trying to mirror what was happening across the street at Pack and Save, so the landscaping along Emery Street really hasn't changed much. But I think that's actually not a step in the right direction. I would like to see that gray structural frame actually be covered with the similar vines that you have that you're going to train up on the frontage side. Yeah, I don't think that you need to try to mirror what's happening across the street at Pack and Save. And this metal frame, to me, it just sticks out like a sore thumb, even though it's painted gray. So I would have liked to have seen that landscaping improvement there. Other comments? I really like the plaza improvements with the seating and the trees, as others have mentioned, and the umbrellas, and I think that it's really a great improvement to what's there currently. So that said, I'm also very pleased with the additional landscaping that's at the end of the curbs, or the end of the drive aisles, excuse me. I did have a question for Fair and Piers. I just got a copy of their report, or their memo, a few minutes ago, or before the meeting started, and just want to make sure I'm understanding the numbers. Okay, so do you have the memo in front of you? I think it was, okay, it was written by Catherine. So the last paragraph, it talks about the speed survey, and it talks about the average speed. So the main drive aisle with an average speed of 16 miles per hour. So that was the average speed. The 85th percentile speed, or the speed at which 85% of the vehicles are traveling less than or equal to, was observed to be 21 miles per hour. Which is a lot faster than what the posted speed limit is of 10 miles per hour within the site. So then at the last part of the memo, in the 3 bullet points, the first bullet point says that the narrowing of the roadway is expected to decrease travel speeds approximately 12%. So decreasing 21 miles per hour by 12% is bringing it down to like 19 miles per hour. So I want to get more information about that and what your recommendations would be for bringing it down to the posted speed limit.
Okay. Ryan McLean with Fair and Pierce. So the posted speed limit actually doesn't have a lot to do with the speed that vehicles travel. It's really the feel of the road and the physical aspects of that. So with the 30-foot wide street, it feels like a city street almost, and so that's why you see the speeds, creeping up to 25 mile per hour speed limit, perhaps. But with the narrowing, that's the typical range in terms of dropping it down to 19 for that average, or for the 85th percentile. But I think the other things that will start to also bring that speed down is just the increased activity with the activation of the site, and more friction along the corridor in terms with the pedestrians and more vehicles turning in and out there. So that'll bring the speeds down as well. And then the vertical elements that are being added, the trees that are being planted, all those things kind of contribute to a road that feels like you should be traveling slower. And I think in addition to that, the relocation of those stop signs is going to encourage people to actually stop at those stop signs, come to a complete stop, because that's where the major conflict volumes are. So that will also help bring that speed down. So I think all those elements together there'll be more than a 12% decrease. That's kind of the 12% is kind of the statistics with the road narrowing.
Okay, thank you for elaborating on that. Yeah, that actually was a good reminder, because I've gone to the other Nordstrom rack in San Leandro, and because it's so crowded, it actually is very slow, the traffic there. Our current situation is there's not a lot of activity there, and we literally have to dart across that street every single time to get to Sports Authority, because cars are just zooming through there. So thanks for clarifying that. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
As far as the findings, I think the only finding that I'm struggling to make at this time is 2.A13, which is kind of says, support development of large, healthy trees. We're kind of getting there with the plaza trees, and as others have pointed out, that's definitely a good move in the right direction. But the parking lot is still unfortunate right now that it's going to stay the way that it is after all the time that we've been striving to get trees in that parking lot. The other finding actually was number 3, where it talks about that the project will not adversely affect the surrounding areas. And I was really concerned about when I was thinking about that and making that note for myself, I was thinking about the residential tenants across the way with regard to the dimmable lights. So I'm glad that we have that. But just with the parking lot being kind of barren, I think that does have an impact on that area. I'm still kind of struggling with that, and I understand that the project is a facade improvement project, and the applicant doesn't believe that they really need to improve the landscape in the parking lot beyond the end of the drive aisles. But I feel like in this project, we actually have an opportunity to improve the shading in that parking lot with some canopy, some trees, and provide something that's attractive to the neighboring buildings. I think that opportunity will be lost if there aren't any upgrades at all in the landscaping in the parking lot. Let's see. About the parking lot, so I know you mentioned that, or the applicant mentioned that they're not going to change the number of parking stalls, they're just going to restripe. But one of the concerns that I have from my own experience going to the other Nordstrom rack is that it's a very tight site, there's a lot more room here. The San Leandro site is much smaller, but all of the parking stalls are very tight and small, and it's very difficult to get cars in and out because they're trying to maximize the number of spaces. So I would want to discourage that from happening for this project in the future, and if there's a way to basically restrict making a change to the parking unless it's reviewed at a later date if they want to make changes to add more parking or make the spots smaller. Because right now you can actually get in and out of your car comfortably. Whereas once things start changing and the demand grows for the shoppers, they're going to start shrinking the parking stalls, and we're going to have the same sort of dismal, crowded, unsafe parking lot that the other Nordstrom Rack has. So, and I guess, with getting back to the trees in the parking lot, one of the commissioners mentioned that the soils there are really just awful. So it's kind of difficult to justify putting more trees there. So I'm kind of, unless you do the silva cells. So I think we might have some magnolia trees that we might be considering relocating. Maybe they can find a home in that parking lot. That's another discussion for later.
Great.
And those are all the comments that I have.
Yeah, I like that you've moved everything, the planters, bike parking, etc., out from under the awnings and created the promenade that you have. I think that's a nice element of the design. And I like that you've dropped the one leg down on the Nordstrom Rack facade to make it feel a little bit more balanced. I would like to, I would like to make sure that the vines really are trained in some way that they will climb up the steel. And I'm not, a landscape architect, but I know it has a hard time climbing up steel, and I think it would improve the overall design immensely if the vines are actually climbing over a lot of that steel structure. And I know that in the landscape plan, or in the plan in general, you have trees on opposite sides of the drive aisle in some locations and not in others, and I know it has to do with public art that's in those, but I didn't know if there was a way to actually incorporate some trees in those areas and still maintain the visibility of the public art. I think the more trees, the more treed this whole drive aisle has on either side, the nicer it's going to feel, and the slower the traffic will be. I think that's it for my comments.
And I'd just like to make some further comments regarding some of the things we've all said about the project. And the thing I'm looking at from my own point of view is, I think we do have a responsibility for some sort of aesthetics, but there's personal taste aesthetics, and then there's just aesthetics that are poorly done. The facade to Nordstrom's Rack is not something I'm quite partial of, but this is a corporate identity, and I don't think it's my responsibility to dictate corporate identity in something. So even though I think there could be a much better design for this, something a little bit more current rather than dated into the 80s, I don't think I want to base my personal decision on approving a project because Nordstrom's Rack identity does not meet my personal aesthetic. So, and the thing I'm thinking of here is, I'm thinking these stores probably want to be open by the Christmas shopping season. And if we've just canceled our August meeting, and if for some reason we don't get the 4 votes, which we have to have tonight to push this through, I don't see that happening because we're back in October to approve something like this again. So the way I'm taking a look at this is, this shopping center is what it is. And we built this back in the 90s when Emeryville was thankful to get whatever it could get. And this is what I explained to the developers when I met with them. And I think it's our responsibility to make sure that if we get improvements, that we get improvements. But this isn't a wholesale redevelopment of the property, it's a facade improvement. So what I'm doing is taking a look at the project for what it is and hoping that this will spur Home Depot on improving it. Maybe if we get more retail in here and more population here, other places will want to build here, and maybe we'll add retailers to that empty parking lot, and we can do that, those improvements that we want. But I think to say that this project is halfway there, and I can't agree with the conditions or the findings. I'm a little concerned of that and fearful that, we're going to stall this project into, 2015, and we may lose a retailer that I'm particularly partial of, and the people I'm talking at work can't wait for this to open here and, spend their tax dollars in our city.
That said, I'll make a motion to approve.
I would second it.
That's with the dimmable lights, with the
Definitely.
changed language on the bicycle rack, and
Right.
I don't know that it needs to be a condition of approval, but I would really like to encourage you to work with them to see about getting some smaller stature trees around the Bullwinkle sculptures maybe, and the vines on the east side of the building.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about a condition about the parking stalls and not shrinking them. So, I mean, I'm going to look to, Charlie, is that something that we can include as a condition of approval, to not increase the number of parking spaces, or is that already provided for in the?
I'm not sure that the PUD has a specific number of parking spaces. I think it might, but that's been modified in the past for Target. I mean, Target, as I recall, reduced the number of parking spaces in their lot in order to make the spaces bigger.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the dimensions are of the existing spaces. I would say, though, that if they were proposing to restripe the parking lot in order to increase or change the number of spaces, it would have to comply with our current code, which requires 8.5 by 18-foot spaces and no compact spaces.
Okay.
So I think, it's probably covered by that.
Okay, if it's covered, I don't need a condition of approval for that.
I would also like to propose a condition of approval that that we actually condition the sort of no outlet or similar sign near the residential parking where you sort of get trapped, because I don't think that exists on the plans right now, so I just wanted to make sure that that is included.
I think there is one there now, actually. I saw one this morning.
Is there?
Yeah.
Well, let's make it a condition. If it's there, it's already done. When I first moved here, I turned down that street several times, and so some notice of that would be nice to that this doesn't go through. So, Bez, would you amend your motion to approve those conditions?
Yes.
And I would second that.
Okay.
Well, just to discuss the motion before we vote, I will just say that I think we've been really raising the bar as far as design review, and this being a design review project, I don't know, this level of design really saddens me. I know it's Nordstrom's Rack's corporate identity, but there's a Target in a Lewis Sullivan building in downtown Chicago. So big corporations have different models, and they can adapt their identity to a variety of different settings. And so I think if we impose some better design requirements, we would probably get it. And I did actually show these plans to a lot of people when I received them, and I would say universally they were sort of they were disliked, and that sort of makes me feel vindicated as an urban designer, that I'm not just being picky, but everyone I showed them to did not like them, and it's not a design that I am willing to impose on our community or my neighborhood, for that matter, for the next 20 years, because we've been stuck with the existing for 20 years, and we're going to be stuck with the next one for 20 years. So I will just say that before we take a vote.
So is there a suggestion you would make to them that they could say, yeah, we could do that tonight and make it a condition of approval?
No, he's saying he doesn't like it at all. He wants something different.
I mean, I did suggest some very minor changes to them, which I think would, I mean, at a minimum, I think some sort of molding on the top of the, a molding consistent with the architectural style, with this sort of modern style on top of, like a crown molding on top of these facade entrances, I think would just even improve the the look of it. I don't know what anybody else feels.
Can we have a vote on this?
Are you ready? Okay, on the motion with the amended conditions, let's see. Oh, hang on a second. I have to reorder this. Commissioner Cardoza?
Aye.
Commissioner Donaldson?
Aye.
Commissioner Gunkel?
Aye.
Commissioner Keller?
Aye.
Vice Chair Tan?
Reluctant about the trees not being in the parking lot, but aye.
And Chair Moss?
No.
5 ayes, is that right? Yes, 5 ayes, 1 no. The application is approved. This decision may be appealed to the City Council within 15 days. Okay.
Can we take a break a minute? I'd like to confer with Michael for a second.
We'll go ahead and get started again. We are without Commissioner Gunkel for these 2 items. He is recused for these 2 items.
Could I just note that Commissioner Gunkel is recused because he lives within 500 feet of the project? Thank you.
Hello again, Commissioners. So now we're looking at Park on Powell Master Sign Program at 1333 and 1303 Powell Street. Here's the location. Powell Street is on the northern side of the property. Doyle is on the eastern, Stamford on the southern part, and Hollis to the west. So Master Sign Program is required for all developments with 5 or more retail tenant spaces, and it creates standards for tenant signage. So it establishes maximum allowable sign area, defines permitted sign materials, defines allowed sign types, and does not dictate sign content. It's designed to provide guidance for tenants over time as they may come and go. So the sign types and tenant spaces, there's 7 different sign types that are included in this master sign program. And where they are allowed varies by the type of tenant space and the design with the building. And so we're going to go through each of the types of sign spaces one by one. And you'll see that there's several different types of spaces, A, B, and C. And those will be shown in the lower right-hand corner of most of the slides you're about to see as well for reference. So the first type of sign that's permitted as part of this master sign program is a canopy sign. The canopy signs are only to be placed above the canopy, not below. Originally, when the applicant turned in this application, they showed the canopy signs as being options for both above and below the canopies. And staff suggested that the space underneath the canopy should be reserved for pedestrian-oriented signs, where it was more appropriate to have signs facing outwards towards the street on the top of the canopy, and the applicant agreed with that assessment. So these are limited to 30 square feet per sign, and they can't encroach too closely to the vertical fins that are shown in the middle here. So they are respectful of the architecture as well. And if you look in the bottom corner here, it shows you where these are allowed. And these are the tenant spaces that have canopies on them. So storefront panel signs, you could actually remove a window and place panel signs, such as shown here. These are restricted to, I apologize, 20 square feet. That information is over here. And they are permitted in all of the tenant spaces except for the ones on the south side of the building. Projecting signs are underneath the canopies that we just spoke about, and they are restricted to 10 square feet maximum, and they have to have 8 feet of clearance, which is consistent with building codes. And they're also allowed on all building fronts there. In situations where there is no canopy, they cannot go above the natural break in the building here. So plaque signs are another option, and they're limited to 6 square feet and go on the sides of the tenant spaces. Window graphics are also an option, 1 per frontage, and limited to 16 square feet. Actually, I believe that might have been changed later on. Sorry, let me check. There might be a discrepancy. Yeah, there's a discrepancy. The intent is not to have a limit of 1 per frontage. It's just limited to 16 square feet total for all of the window space. That way, if you wanted to have 2 8-foot square signs, you could do that as well, but you couldn't exceed 16 square feet total. And temporary signs are also limited to 1 per tenant store frontage and to a duration of 60 days. These would also be required to have sign permits. Temporary signs without master sign programs are required to have permits, and these would be as well. They're also non-illuminated. The master sign program also restricts what type of open and closed signs can be in the windows, but this isn't something that the planning department would regulate. That would strictly be between the management or ownership of the building and the tenants. The planning department does not regulate open and closed signs. So for master sign program findings, it needs to be found that it promotes visual harmony, and this application does provide guidance for materials, lighting, location, and sign size throughout the development. The signs must relate well to the building and be compatible with the architecture, and the proposed sign locations and quantities do take into consideration building features such as the canopies and window spaces. And it must be in character with the surrounding area, and the high quality of materials and size of signs is consistent with the visual character of the area. Additionally, master sign program findings must be that the total aggregate sign area is consistent with the planning regulations of 1 square foot of sign area per linear foot of public frontage. These are consistent with that. They cannot, the amount of square footage, regardless of what type of signs you pick, cannot exceed that per this sign program. And in some cases, it may be more strict in that if you had several frontages of tenant space and it exceeded 100 square feet, the master sign program says you cannot have more than 100 square feet of signage. So if you were to have more than 100 square feet of tenant space, you cannot have more than 100 square feet of signage. So permitted signage is no more than necessary. What I just said is consistent with that, and it's also consistent with the planning regulations, which do not permit excessive signage. And the master sign program must comply with Chapter 5, Article 16, which is the sign section of the planning code, and it's compliant with those. Required findings for signs that it must be consistent with the general plan to respect architecture and accentuate activity and presence at the street level is how this application is consistent with the general plan. The signs must conform to the Emeryville design guidelines, and this does that by using unified building facade and integrating in all elements and having signs that are legible and readable with high quality materials. As I talked about, master sign program doesn't dictate content, but it does talk about materials and material quality in here, and also when it would come for review before the planning staff ensures that signs must be legible. Also must be high design quality with no adverse effects to the surroundings, and it's found to be compatible with the buildings in the surrounding area and not be excessive. So staff recommends approval for this. Ted Luthen, who's the applicant, is also here and has something to say. So if you'd like to ask me questions now or after he speaks, either way.
Any questions for staff?
Yeah.
I was concerned about the total square footage is restricted, but you could spread that among 3 different sign types?
Right, because the sign types are limited to themselves and square footage, right? So one type of sign could have a maximum of 10 square feet. Another has a maximum square footage of the canopy sign, for example, of 30 square feet. So you could have a canopy sign and a window sign and, say, a plaque sign, and all of those together might only total, say, 56 square feet. And what it could not exceed is the 100 square feet was the ultimate maximum, regardless of if you have more than 100 square feet of frontage. But if you only had a tenant space with, say, 30 square feet, because the maximum is 1 square foot per linear of street frontage, you could only pick one of those signs. So if you have 50, you could have 2. Does that make sense?
Now, how many of those could be electrified?
Do you mean illuminated?
Yeah, illuminated.
It specifies in the plan which ones can be illuminated. It is rather limited. Let's just check.
So only one of them could be?
So each sign says whether it can be illuminated or not on the page. So on page 5, where it discusses lighting for canopy signs, it says it may be externally lit and specifies that it can be halo lit or lit using decorative exposed neon, push through acrylic lettering, or backlit. So it's very specific about that. For storefront panel signs, which is on page 6, it says that the signs may be externally lit, halo lit, or lit internally. For projecting signs, here's where it explicitly says that it must be dimmable, but that's also in the conditions of approval. It can be achieved specifically with either external top-down lighting, push-through letters, or internally illuminated graphic elements. For plaque signs, which are on page 8, it has to be external top-down spotlighting or push-through, or internal illumination of graphic elements. And window signs may not be illuminated. And temporary signage and open-close signs may also not be illuminated. So as I perhaps misspoke earlier, most of the signs can be illuminated in some way.
Sarah, what is a vacuum-formed sign?
It's kind of like what it sounds like. It's like a plastic sign where they and form the sign with sound effects.
Because at first I thought you mean the signs where they blow the air into them and they wave around, and
no.
I thought it was that type of sign,
Reverse vacuum.
Reverse vacuum sign.
That would. No, that's not what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
We should prohibit those too.
They are through the sign regulations.
Yeah.
Overall.
Okay.
Yeah. So that doesn't have to be called out within this document.
Okay.
But I still don't understand what a vacuum form sign is.
Like shrink.
Does anybody have a
wrap?
better, or maybe
like-
would you like to help? You
have to come to the microphone.
I'm Ted Luthen from Ross Luthen Creative. A vacuum form sign, you see these in Service stations, gas stations, the Shell sign, they take a piece of plastic and they vacuum form it so it becomes sort of dimensional, but it's plastic and the whole thing glows. So we're discouraging that. And the other thing about, if I could just respond to the lighting, we very specifically say that the backgrounds can't be lit. So it says there's no internally lit sign cabinets. So if somebody's name goes up, you know, tenant name, only the letters themselves can light, not the background. So you're not going to get this glowing sign box.
Thanks.
So since you're here, I have one question for you.
Sure.
On the window signs, I see that they're only, whoops, where's window signs? I see that it's only 16 square feet, I'm assuming per tenant that would be allowed.
Per frontage, yeah.
And then it says not to exceed 15% of window area. Is the intent of that it would be 15% of any particular window pane?
Exactly, yeah. And the thought with the 16 square feet is that, and not limiting the number, is that if somebody wanted to have a little logo and they wanted to repeat a coffee cup with a cafe and have it running along the bottom of a window, they could kind of disperse that as long as they weren't completely obliterating a window and with more than 15%, obviously, or exceeding the 16 square feet.
Beer signs.
Okay.
Did you find it?
I Googled the vacuum sign.
Vacuum form.
I had to see what they were talking about there. Okay. Good. I don't have any other questions.
No. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. If anyone from the public would like to speak on this item, please come forward.
Commissioners, I'd just like to remind everyone of the often offensive feel of the internally illuminated sign. I mean, there's something about the internal illumination that makes it a lot brighter than an externally illuminated sign. And I'm particularly concerned about the signs on Powell that face the condominiums immediately across the street. I'm personally a little bit concerned also if the signs at the live-work units facing Stanford are internally illuminated. But it reminds me of the art.com sign, and the signs that people tend to take offense at the most tend to be the internally illuminated signs that just appear a lot brighter than externally illuminated signs. And I'd like to ask your consideration of where those signs are located and not located in your decision. Thank you.
I think that's a good question. Is there a restriction on how often, I mean, when the signs have to be turned off at night?
No.
Could we place something like that?
You could.
Can you give me a better description of an internally lit sign? Because I'm thinking of Scarlet City signs who just put theirs up but aren't illuminated yet. But I know the letters on that aren't particularly lit. I think they're lit from behind. So would that be considered an internally lit sign?
Yeah.
Because I don't think that would be bright or offensive.
Internally illuminated, I think, generally refers to when the light is directing towards you when you're looking at the sign. So there's like signs that have lights within them, but are like halo lit, so that the light points backwards.
Okay.
So that's sort of internally illuminated, but it's not, I don't think it's usually what people are referring to.
So is the internally lit what you said, the box lit that are not going to be allowed, or is that different than the one you said is not going to be allowed?
Yeah, we're not allowing the background of the sign to light up.
Okay.
So if you imagine your screen up here, the background is lighting up right now.
Right.
If you imagine the reverse of that, where the background was dark and only the lettering was showing up, that's the effect that we're going to have.
Okay. Okay.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this item?
The
Yeah,
All right.
the Apple store sign there, where just the apple's lighting up,
Okay.
that's basically what we'll have. The background will be opaque, and the lettering of the logo
So
itself.
the reverse of that would be if the black background was lit and the apple was black. And then that
Exactly.
would be, okay. And Brad, is that what you're concerned with, or is what you're talking about something different? I'm just trying to get a picture of what Brad is asking that we not do.
Yes, my concern is not the halo lit, but the internally illuminated where
Right.
the light is.
But, so what he's describing and saying is not allowed, is that meeting your criteria, or do you want something else not allowed?
I'm also asking that anything that's shining at you, that where the sign itself is illuminating, not be allowed.
Like the art.com.
Well, the best example
The
is this
apple.
picture in the middle here, which is what was called a front-lit sign.
Right.
Or an externally illuminated.
Yeah.
Which, you know, you go into any high-end little town, and that's all they allow.
Right.
And it makes an enormous difference.
Having lived in Carmel, working for the city, I know what that night ambiance is like.
I have one more question for the applicant, if you wouldn't mind. Can you maybe walk us through which signs in this master sign program would be allowed to be internally illuminated? I was trying to look for myself. So it looks like the projecting signs would be,
Yeah.
and then the box signs, but not the background. And then, am I missing anything?
Let's see, the signs that are up on the canopies, so somebody, I would anticipate that somebody will have individual letters that could either light up halo or the letters themselves could light. So that's the canopy sign on page 5. Oh, here we go. We can navigate right here.
There.
So the canopy signs, so the signs that are above the canopy could be lit. The storefront panel, like the Apple sign, if they decided to change a glass panel into a sign, that could be lit, again, just the logo or the lettering. The little projecting signs, and these are fairly small. I think the projection's limited at 30 inches, so they're, you know, this big sign. And again, backgrounds can't be lit.
Okay, so
just
the
let-
second one here, I can't read the text on that. Would that be lit within or only lit from without?
It could be done either way.
And
so
that
if they
would be
wanted
okay?
little gooseneck spots on it, they
Right,
could do
but
that.
being lit within, wouldn't that be shining out?
Yes, the lettering will shine out.
They're all backlit signs.
Yeah.
Because you can't
There's no
halo lit a projecting
Okay, well,
sign.
I'm seeing the second one, it's, what is it, K, or APA?
It's Avalon.
Oh, okay, Avalon. Okay, I'd see that as being like a plastic translucent sign that would have a light in it, so that whole thing would glow.
Right, and we
That's
don't
not backlit.
We don't allow that.
Oh, that wouldn't be allowed?
Yes.
Okay.
So if that were, well, that would be a hard sign to light the way we're doing it, because only that white background and the red background wouldn't be able to be lit.
Right.
So you might
But
be
if
able
that was a flat board, you could light it with a spot outside?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
It does say, though, that the illumination must be dimmable. So any illumination must not adversely affect residential tenants for this type of sign. So,
So I guess what I'm getting at is there something we need to change or modify to meet Brad's request, or is this already in here? It seems like it's already in here.
Well, I think we should definitely have a time on the light. It shouldn't be on when the store's closed or something.
Oh, no, I don't think that's right.
Before the applicant sits down, do we have any other questions
we
for
have to
him?
close the public.
Yeah, no, okay, yeah, and no other speakers, so I'm gonna close the public hearing. So I do have one suggestion, which is that I would like to see the canopy signs as no internally illuminated signs allowed. So they could be halo lit, or they could be externally illuminated, but no, I think,
The letters themselves couldn't be plastic and light up individually.
yeah, no channel letters. They're just, like cabinet signs are bad, and we've all, I think, decided that. I think channel letters are the next frontier, so.
And
They have to push through acrylic lettering?
That's just where they're usually like, you know, aluminum letters with a plastic face and the light is within, right?
And it does say that the front lit channel letters or face illuminated sign boxes will not be permitted. So does that address your concern about the channel
I
lettering
guess.
on the canopy signs?
I guess I just don't, I guess I understand how internally illuminated signs would be allowed there then, if there aren't. I don't understand what it's referring to then.
And regarding the timers, I don't think I could support having all the lights turned off. There's a couple reasons for this. Number one, it adds additional safety lighting on the street if you're walking on the street at night. And secondly, if someone's coming home from work late at night, they may see a store and come back the next day. And I think it creates an ambiance for the street that doesn't become a black dead zone. And I mean, if the signs are not offensive to the neighborhood, they're not glaring and they're not shining out, when daylight savings comes around, it's dark at 5 o'clock. So I think, from...
Open, I agree.
But they're not, a lot of these places aren't going to be open after 5 o'clock.
Oh, almost all of them would.
On the corner of this development where it meets Powell and Hollis meet, isn't there a pretty big light feature there for the project just in general?
Yeah.
And it's enormous.
I just enjoy it as a person who walks at night. Like I said, I lived in Carmel at night. I would walk at night. Lights from signs and storefronts create ambience, I think. And to restrict that.
They're all front-lit signs there.
Well, but the signs we're creating are going to be pretty friendly.
All backlit signs. All of these are backlit. Front-lit signs have to have a light fixture in front of them facing them.
Right, and that's allowed. I think it's depending on what the person wants.
Because it's a lot more expensive and it's not doesn't catch your eye as much as a backlit sign does.
I think people do it.
Yeah, I don't think it's a problem.
Only if they have to.
Well,
only if
we want them to have to.
Only if it's Carmel. Only if it's Carmel.
I have to say, I really appreciate that the applicant is proposing. I think all of these signs are really high-quality sign types, and I really appreciate that. It's really refreshing honestly, when an applicant wants to maintain really high-quality signs to make their project continue to look good, because that's not always the case.
I think that I like the sign program. I am a little concerned about the canopy internally lit signs, because the other ones that are underneath the building overhangs, they're going to be shielded from, upper units are going to be shielded, and it's going to be something you see as a pedestrian or as you drive by, but it's not going to be projecting onto the people across the street or whatever. But that one instance of having above the canopy where it is internally lit, I'm a little worried about.
Well, that would be the one that would bother the neighbors the most,
Right.
and maybe that's the one that should...
The signs that face the residential units across the street, in the evening, I don't understand who are they advertising for, because on Powell Street, people just are going to zoom by there. They're not going to be slowing down to look for something on that stretch of road.
Well, it'll probably be like a lot of places, vacant stores.
I love your optimism.
We got an awful lot of them.
But, I mean, that does beg the question of, dimming the signs at night or turning them off, and, if the neighbors find that they have concerns about those signs, because I don't think they're advertising for any particular clientele at that hour.
Well, we do have that condition, right, that they be dimmable.
Yeah, that they be dimmable.
And if the neighbors complain, they'll come to Charlie, and Charlie will tell them to dim it.
That's right.
Can we entertain a motion to approve?
Well, I want to clarify one thing first, because I am a little confused about the canopy signs. So the applicant told us that internally illuminated signs would be allowed there, but reading this, it says canopy signs may be externally lit. Okay, got that. Halo lit. Got that. Lit using decorative exposed neon, pushed through acrylic lettering, or backlit. So I actually don't see, except for the exposed neon, I don't see how they would be internally illuminated. Am I missing something?
No, maybe I was mistaken. I thought it was one of the ones that was
internally illuminated.
Can I elaborate?
Yes.
Please.
A couple different ways that could be done. They could be halo lit, where the lighting is actually internal,
Okay.
but the face is opaque and the light bleeds out the sides. So that's technically an internally lit thing because the lighting sources are inside. It could also be, shape of a logo, and then the reverse cut push through. What they do is they take the solid aluminum face, and they cut out the logo or the letters, say the letter T. They cut that out, and then they take a piece of acrylic and they fit it into that space from behind, and they push it through. And then you can either have an opaque face, and again it bleeds out and becomes a halo lit letter, or that light would actually be coming through the face of the letter. But we do specifically forbid channel letters, so we don't want channel letters up on the canopy.
Okay.
So if someone's going to do a letter up there and light it, it has to be an architectural grade thing.
So, okay, thank you.
Sure.
I have one more question or comment. So on the canopy signs, it stipulates that visible bird repellent devices are not permitted on those signs. So is the plan to have shock tape on the signage of all types, including like the projecting signs? Because the pigeons like to roost on those too.
Yes, I think that the idea is just that whatever
you
bird
use,
deterrent
it's not
just can't be visible. Yep.
Okay.
So whatever they can come up with just can't be visible.
Okay.
So can I make a motion to approve?
Sure.
Are there any conditions that anyone wants to add?
Well, how do y'all feel about the push-through acrylic lettering? Is there any?
Describe again what it looks like.
That's the one he was describing.
Sorry. I was reading.
I think the Apple sign is done that way, where the apple is actually cut out of an aluminum panel, and the apple is an acrylic piece that's fit into that space.
But imagine if the apple...
it pushes out.
Yeah,
but imagine if the apple was someone's store name, right, on a panel, on a rectangular panel on the canopy.
Okay.
I think the amount of light that pushes through that is pretty limited in its range of distance, how far it will go out. So, and if they're dimmable as well, I think if they become a problem, they would be dimmed and calmed down.
Right. They're part of that requirement to be dimmable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason we chose that sign type is because that they don't tend to project light forward. You have to use a thicker piece of acrylic for the face. And so it doesn't have that same intensity of something like a channel letter. It's very much an architectural grade style sign. That was the goal.
So I made the motion to approve as staff recommends.
Did we have a second?
Buzz.
Oh, okay. And there were no modifications. That's as...
Well, dimmable, is that?
That's in there.
They're all dimmable.
All right, ready? Commissioner Cardoza?
Aye.
Commissioner Donaldson?
Aye.
Commissioner Gunkel is recused. Commissioner Keller?
Aye.
Vice Chair Tan?
Aye.
And Chair Moss?
Aye.
5 ayes. The application is approved. This decision may be appealed to the City Council within 15 days.
All right. Parkside Part 2.
Park on Powell.
Or, I'm sorry, Park on Powell.
I was like, what is
At least you didn't call it paper mill.
I didn't even know. Where is this
Chair Moss, I'll also note that Commissioner Gunkel is recused from this item as well because he lives within, 500 feet of the project. However, he may remain in the council chambers and participate as a member of the public. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's the fine print.
All in one breath.
Good evening, Commissioners. It's been a long time. So now we're looking at Park on Powell, their major sign permit. So this is for identity for the actual project, not the tenants of the project. And this is at 1333, 1315, and 1303 Powell Street. Same as before, Powell Street to the north, Doyle to the east, Stanford to the south, and Hollis to the west. So just to familiarize with the addresses, 1333 Powell is the one that's closest, was on the corner of Hollis and Powell. 1303 Powell is the one furthest east along Powell Street, and 1315 is a little tiny building in between them. All of the signs are color-coded as well as have a letter assigned to them. So we'll be going through and, whoa, sorry about that. We'll be going through and looking at each sign type. And similar to last time, the colors and codes will be shown on each slide. So the first sign, if you look down here, is on the corner of Powell and Hollis, pardon me. And this is the primary identity sign for the project, stating Park on Powell. Signs are illuminated from the back, but the front is opaque, and it has a perforated metal siding. It's located towards the upper part of the building, the upper third of the building, and is illuminated, and is some distance from what you spoke about during the last application, where the public art piece is.
This rendering makes the sign look like it's glowing itself.
It is.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. But is it supposed to glow through it?
It'll glow out the sides.
Kind of, how would you come up?
Because of the perforations.
Yeah, the face itself won't glow. The face is opaque. It glows out the sides, and it will kind of softly light the wall behind it.
So this isn't very accurate rendering then.
Yeah, it's a little bright.
Looks like the letters themselves are glowing.
A little brighter than it would really
the wall
be.
behind it.
Yeah.
Okay. So towards the corner of that same building, the eastern corner along Powell Street, is another canopy sign. This one is below the canopy and is a leasing center sign. And it is not illuminated. And here's a rendering of that sign. It's a little bit difficult to see in this blow up here. So there's a monument sign located between the two buildings along Powell. Here we are. It's located to help direct people going to the parking area. And then there's several more wall signs. All of these are relatively small, ranging between 7.2 square feet for the retail and leasing parking, and then 4.8 square feet for the residential parking signs. And these are located at each of the parking entry-exit areas.
And neither of them are illuminated,
Let me double check. No, these are not illuminated. And then additionally, there's 3 address signs, and they're each about 5 square feet, and it's hard to see on this blow up. I apologize. Hopefully in front of you in your plans you can see them slightly better. But they're centered near corners of each of the buildings, and none of these are illuminated either. So similar to last time, these have major design review findings opposed to master sign program findings. The signs must be necessary because of the nature of the establishment and location. These provide building identity as well as directional information for the project. They need to be no larger than necessary or be of extraordinary design. And these signs adequately identify the building while staying well under their permitted aggregate sign area, which is the 1 square foot of sign area per linear square foot of the project. So these signs are substantially underneath that. And the signs must comply with all provisions of Article 16, which is the sign section of the planning regulations. Additionally, the size, materials, color, style, and illumination must keep with the visual character of the area. None of these are illuminated. They're not obtrusive, except for, the only one that's illuminated is the Park on Powell sign on the corner. The signs are also readable, proportional, and visible, and they fit within the context of the building. And lastly, the signs relate well to the building design and architectural features. The signs and colors and materials are compatible with building design and respect architectural features by not bleeding over windows or falling over the canopies or any of the other specific designs of the building. Required findings for the signs, they must be consistent with the general plan. And they're consistent with the general plan in that they distinguish Emeryville for the community and visitors, and it respects the existing architecture. They also conform to the Emeryville design guidelines. They are unified with the building facade and integrated into the building features and elements. They're architecturally compatible, and they're of a high design quality using high quality materials, and they're compatible with the building and surrounding area. So once again, Ted is available if you have questions, as am I.
Any questions for staff? Great, thank you. Would the applicant like to come up?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I didn't get to say it before, but thank you for your time. And I'd like to also especially thank staff, especially Sarah. This particular piece was very much a collaborative effort. It started out very different than what you see today. And a lot of that was due to Sarah's input in the rapid response we got from staff. We got a lot of great input and great notes, and we were able to kind of change on the fly. We had addressing issues and project name issues and all sorts of stuff flying around all at one time. So really appreciate the input, the response that we got. And then the other thing I'd like to say is that we did think about the neighbors across the street. That's why the primary sign is pointing perpendicular to Powell. And it's located in a place where there's no glare coming into any of our residents and really shouldn't affect any of our neighbors or anything like that. And really, that's the only lit piece. The leasing sign is unlit, and the thought there is that the activity in the leasing center is supposed to be really the focal point. So it's more of an informational, and really the bulk of the rest of the signs are really informational, help people find parking, park in the right place, and locate the leasing center. So that's it. Thank you again.
Thank you. Yeah. With that, we'll open the public hearing. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak on this item? All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing.
Well, I think these signs are so unobtrusive that I have no objection to it.
I like the entire sign system except the large Park on Powell sign. I think it's too much with all the other lighting that's coming from that corner. I don't think it's necessary for the apartment complex. It's not a hotel. People are going to come in and lease it, and you don't need an 18-foot long sign. So that's...
It's very softly illuminated, though. It's only around the side of it. It's not the front. The letters aren't illuminated.
So I agree with both of you. I think the illumination is good, but I also think it's a little too large, and that's partially because of the findings that these sign findings that I've never liked and still don't, which are sort of that, it's got to be no bigger than necessary, but it has to be readable, which is, I find those at odds with each other. But I think it's plenty readable, and in looking, to say it's no larger than it has to be, I think it's probably a little larger than it has to be. So, I think if it was reduced, 8 or 10%, it wouldn't be terrible.
The other thing, I have a couple comments is, and it might just be the rendering, but when it is placed in the building, I'd be careful on how you place the park and on, because in the renderings it looks like one word. So between the C and the O, I would probably create enough space. And again, it might just be the rendering and the angle that it's looking at. But when I first looked at this, I was going, what is that name?
Parson.
Yeah, Parson. It's and then I have a kind of a concern because of the scale of the signs and the lack of them. And that being the parking. The public parking garage on 65th Street, when Aquarius was across the street, the owner, Patrick, there often complained that people said they could never find parking in the area. And that sign was quite obvious to me that there was parking there. This public parking sign seems even more difficult to see. And what I'm envisioning is we're lucky enough to get a cafe on the Powell Street side on the park there. Someone's driving by, they see I'd like to eat there. But where do I park? How do they find where they park? By just that small sign that is on Powell Street, and it's only about 6 foot high. So I think we're going to have people driving around the blocks or missing the opportunity to go to shops there because they can't. I mean, you got to understand the speed that people travel on that street. It's not pretty high. It's not Doyle Street and it's not Stanford Street, but it's Powell and it's very busy. So and I'm hoping that we're going to get a lot of businesses there who, some of them need their customers to park. And then once they get into that area, if they're lucky enough to find that sign, the signs over the door, I think, because there's going to be, what, 3 doors or just 2?
Yeah, in the alley there will be.
Can you come to the microphone, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, but when you get into the alley, there will be, well, the resident door on the left will be closed.
Right.
So really the only open door will be yours, really, on the right.
Yeah, and so I'm just a little concerned that the sign over that door,
Right.
maybe we need something that
Projecting
comes out
sign or something.
perpendicularly, that projects out from that wall, so someone driving in could see, oh, that's where I go. But even today, I was coming home, and someone had double parked next to the construction zone in front of Avenue 64 to run in the leasing office there because they couldn't find parking anywhere. And they have parking for leasing in the back of the building. But it's very hard if you're unfamiliar with the area to find out where that parking is. So I'm concerned that we're going to have missed opportunities for retailers. We're going to have people driving around, maybe even stopping places they shouldn't stop to try to figure out where all this parking, you know, where the parking is. So I just don't know if it's been thought out from a driver's perspective in a car, how they figure out where to park to go and, you know.
When you really got to pay attention, because is it park
Yeah.
with a K or park with a C? But I hear you. Maybe I think maybe a solution to that would be just including, you know, at least on this one sign that's retail and leasing parking rather than resident parking. Just including on there as well, like the, you know, sort of universal P in a blue circle.
Right, and I wonder if that P on the monument side shouldn't be more universal rather than
Right,
artistic P.
universal sign for P would help.
Yeah, because, you know, I'm trying to get bike groups to use the green coloring, as everyone knows handicapped is blue and white. So if we can kind of get a uniform thing for parking and for bikes, then drivers will click onto that instantly. So I appreciate the artistic element of that P, but and driving by and looking at that, it's not going to tell me that's where I park. And so that's just my only concern, is I really want to see these businesses, if we finally get them in there, Buzz, that they thrive.
Right. To piggyback off of your concern with the park, the P, you know, how cars are going to know where to park, I'm kind of concerned about just the wording. It says retail. And I've never really noticed other places like this, whether they say retail or whether they say restaurants or whether they say shopping.
Yeah.
Will the average person know that retail means that
all-inclusive?
it includes everything, or will they be confused and think that it's loading for retailers or parking to offload your retail, merchandise? I mean,
Do you pay to park, or is it?
yeah, exactly.
So what would you propose? Customer parking?
Customer parking sounds like a good alternative, because we don't really know if they're going to be shops or restaurants.
But they're going to be a customer regardless.
But there will be customers.
Yeah, that's a good call.
Yeah.
Would anyone care to make a motion?
I move to approve with the Park on Powell sign being slightly reduced, and the 10% you suggested.
I think that would be
And that the
fair amount.
customer parking sign be made more
Uniform and
presentable or something. More prominent, I guess, really.
Right.
Well, I think a more uniform, try to use a more uniform logo for parking rather than an artistic one.
For the symbol.
Can we just specify some sort of universal parking symbol on both of those?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And call it customer parking and not retail.
Universal, I mean, the P being sideways looks like, I don't know. Yeah, it should be
doesn't tell me
upright.
that's where parking is, but
Yeah.
I think the sideways P is for park on Powell, isn't it?
I don't, could be either way. Can I just ask the staff, is that clear enough?
No.
You got that confused look.
First, as far as the Park on Powell sign, you want it reduced in size, correct?
Correct.
Is that right here?
10%.
Did we hear 10%? Now, this is 10% of the linear dimensions? Because 10% of the linear dimensions results in about a 20% reduction in area. So is that?
No, I think it's 10% of area was
Area.
my intent.
10% of area is about I think about a 3 or 4% reduction in linear dimensions. So 10% reduction in area. Okay?
So what does that mean for the linear dimension before we settle on that? Like how much shorter?
Sort of hard
Pull
to
out our
say.
calculators.
Well, it's almost 14 feet long.
Okay.
So, get your calculator there, Michael.
Yep.
It would be reduced by about, zero. I think it would be reduced by about 4 or 5 inches.
So 0.
So would you say 20?
0, basically.
If you reduce it 10%, it's 14 feet, that would be 1.4
Right.
feet. So that's about 1 foot 5 inches, something like that.
I have more of a problem with the illumination than with the size, actually. But
Well,
that's me.
I think the illumination is just going to be a soft illumination. And I guess I have a different take on signs. Coming from a more artistic background, I appreciate the graphicness of signs.
Yeah.
And I think, seeing that driving by the freeway at night, it just kind of draws people into Emeryville. And I don't have a problem with signs being lit.
well,
I think it's going to distract from the public art. I think it's got a big light piece next to it, and I don't think it adds to the
gonna ma-
visual
What about-
composition.
What about externally illuminated?
Sign's
What,
gonna
what
be
do you, how do
dark.
you feel about if it was externally illuminated?
that's not the way it is.
It is going to be externally illuminated by all this light coming out of the light column over
It's true
here.
enough. 'Cause it's,
No, it's not, because the letters are going to be dark at night. The wall behind it is going
Yeah.
to be light, because there's no light coming out of the letters.
that's,
Actually, yeah, I don't know. I honestly, I think it would look kind of cool if they just put the sign on the light column and let it be lit by the light column. I mean, it would be negative lit, sort of, right?
Huh?
I don't-
What do you do?
No, I don't think that would be good either.
well, and I think Commissioner Cardozo makes a point that this image is not really accurate because the letters will actually be dark, and it will be almost halo lit. Because it's the side light is where it's perforated, so the light will come out from the side of these. So the letters themselves are not going to be lit.
The side
The
is
wall will be lit,
All will be lit.
and the letters will be dark because they're not lit. Is that correct?
Yeah,
That is correct. The face of the letters will not.
Yeah.
They'll go dark.
so it's going to be pretty subtle anyway.
Yeah. And then just to clarify, so if we reduce the area square footage by 10%, and if the height of the sign is still remaining to be 22 inches, it actually, the length of the sign will be more like 12 and a half feet. So we actually, by reducing it 10%, you would shorten the sign by a foot and a quarter.
I think they'd probably keep the proportionality of it, though, no?
Yeah.
I would hope.
But I don't know.
Well, I think it's pretty subtle, and it's not going to jump out at you.
I do too.
because it's not illuminated.
A reduction of 10%, it says here that it's 13 feet 9 inches, I believe.
Yeah.
So a 10% reduction would be 12 feet 4.5 inches.
So are we
Yeah,
getting
that's
much
what I
from
came
that?
up with.
Are we getting much of a reduction by doing that?
Foot and a half.
We're getting a foot and a half. That's what I wanted to point out. We're not just getting 5 inches.
That's pretty extensive.
So it's pretty extensive.
And I would suggest that you would want it reduced proportionally in both directions.
Correct.
Yeah.
So 10% of the
That's
height
what
also.
Commissioner Moss was saying.
Presuming the light would still work.
So instead of 22 inches, it would be about 20 inches.
But that doesn't, mathematically, does that follow? If you reduce each dimension by 10%, I think you have effectively made more than a 10% reduction in area, right?
Correct. That's what I said. A 10%
Okay.
reduction in linear dimensions results in a 19% reduction in area. Because each dimension is now 0.9 of what it used to be, and 0.9 times 0.9 is 0.81, which is 19% less than 1.0, right?
What we're not seeing is what is the width of the letter. I don't see it on any of.
I think it's 1.5.
Thickness of the letter?
Yeah.
I think it's 7 inches deep.
No, not
Well,
the
the
depth.
the letter itself is 1.5
Oh,
inches.
1.5.
it's about 1.5 inches wide, the stroke.
Oh, okay, so it's
Yeah.
There you
really
go.
small.
Mm-hmm, skinny.
And in the P and the O, you're going to see the wall through those.
Yeah, you'll see the wall in the centers of the A and the P and the O.
Okay. So the lighting is going to be pretty low under any circumstance because you,
Yes. I actually have a picture of a similar.
Put it on the overhead
I
camera.
think you can put it
That work?
on that and it will,
Where's that go?
Switch to that. Sorry, I'm not.
Oh.
Yeah. Switch between?
Oh, look at that.
Oopsies.
But these letters are much bigger and thicker than
Yes.
what we're talking about.
Yeah, they're much bigger and thicker, but you can see how the faces go dark and just the edge glows
okay, through the perforation.
through the perforated metal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
so they are much brighter than,
Well, but the letters we're talking about, these are pretty deep. The letters we're talking about would be at least half this depth?
they're 7
Or about the
inches
same.
deep.
They're 7 inches deep.
And that's what these are?
Yeah, they're. I think these ones are 8, and these are proposed at 7.
And then the letters themselves are going to be thinner than this?
Yeah, they're thinner than that, and they're quite a bit smaller than these two.
So that,
It glows
that
much
concerns
more.
me more, because, I mean, it's
Yeah.
more lighting than I had thought. I mean, that's even, I mean, you know, shrinking the letters, that's, I mean, it's still that much lighting, right?
Yeah,
'Cause
it's still,
the depth.
if you go all the way around each letter, that's a lot of lighting. that's
Yeah.
going out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that photo is making it look a lot brighter than it really is. It's a pretty subtle.
Yeah, you can
Effect.
barely read the letters here, it's so bright.
Well, these aren't mounted against a wall either, are they?
No, they're mounted against glass.
Yeah. So that's reflecting more light.
Yeah, and these are much thicker letters. And these
That's
are-
what I'm saying, yeah. So would it be something that if they were illuminated and then it became something that we felt was problematic and we asked you to turn them off, would that be something that that you'd be adverse to, or?
No, I think they're scheduled to be dimmable, so that we will be able to adjust the light level. So I think if you get out and you have the art piece that's underneath the walkway and the two are fighting, I think they could be modulated.
I think approving it with lighting gives us the option of one way or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just so you know, our fabricator's having difficulty making them that thick, 7 inches deep. At the end of the day, they may only be 4 inches deep.
That'd be awesome.
Because it's so thin, the stroke is so thin, they're having trouble getting a soldering tool
would
in
imagine.
to work on them.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to stipulate that they had to be thinned down to, 4 or 5 inches, I'd be fine with that.
I think that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's make that the condition, that you make them 4 inches, and that if we find them, as the community finds them problematic, and they ask the planning director to turn them off or dim them, we do that.
Well, we have that condition in there already.
There.
Sounds reasonable?
We don't have the shutting off, we just have the dimming in the conditions right now.
Well,
Yeah.
right.
So-
I mean, I suppose you could dim to 0, but
That would shut them off. Okay, is that,
So do you want to read back what you have as the motion, Charlie?
well, it sounds like, let's see. So for the Park on Powell sign, I have 10% reduction in linear dimensions and reduction of depth to 4 inches. And for the, replace the word retail with customer and include some sort of a P parking logo on each of the parking signs.
That's more considered standard industry, something that's more identifiable to customers as parking and not Park on Powell.
If you'd like to say the international symbol for parking, that would be fine.
international symbol?
Yeah, it's a
Perfect.
P in a circle.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So was that my motion or Buzz's?
That was
Buzz's
Buzz
motion.
made the motion.
Motion?
I think you did.
Yeah, you made that motion.
Commissioner Cardoza made the motion. Was there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, are we ready? Okay, on the motion, Commissioner Cardoza?
Aye.
Commissioner Donaldson?
No.
Commissioner Gunkel is recused. Commissioner Keller?
Aye.
Commissioner, Vice Chair Tan?
Aye.
And Chair Moss. Was that an aye?
Aye.
Okay. We have 4 ayes, 1 no, and 1 recusal. The application is approved. This decision may be appealed to the City Council within 15 days.
All right, moving on, we have a Park with a K project. So this is a study session on the Christie Avenue Park redesign and expansion.
And on that, I have to recuse myself because of living proximity of closer than 500 feet to the project.
Thank you. And
Not an owner.
are there,
Not an owner, so
We're not going to go with that tonight. We're just
given that, are there any other disclosures on this item? I will disclose that I did meet with the applicant on the larger marketplace project when that study session was before us, but not specifically on this park project. Can we have the staff report, please?
Sure. Good evening, Chair Moss and Commissioners. So this is an FDP for the Marketplace Christie Park expansion and redesign. As you may recall, the Marketplace PUD was approved in 2008, and that project included a variety of mix of uses to replace the existing surface parking lots to create residential units to the tune of about over 650, 180,000 square feet of retail, as well as 120,000 square feet of office. And the project was to be built in phases over a period of 25 years. In October of 2010, the first phase was approved. The FDP for the first phase was approved, and this 93-unit residential building is currently under construction. At the December of 2013, last year, the Commission saw a study session on a proposal for realignment of Shelmount Street and construction of a garage with ground floor retail as well as a new grocery store. This proposal at this point has been deferred to a later stage. So what we are looking at here is a study session for an FDP application for the Christie Avenue Park redesign and expansion. So this is the graphic for the Marketplace build-out, and where you see the red circle is the location of the park. And the next graphic kind of gives you a better picture of the area of the park that was approved as part of the Marketplace PUD. This aerial overview kind of gives you the existing situation. You have the existing park, the Christie Park, which is right here, and this will be expanded to the north of it, which is currently an existing parking lot. So the existing park is about 0.81 acres, and the expansion would be a little less than half an acre, bringing the total park site to 1.25 acres. Now, this is the preliminary design for the park. This is something that has not been shown to the community at the community meeting or at the Parks and Recreation Committee meeting. At both these meetings, the approach that the applicant took was to introduce the site, talk about the site conditions, show graphics of different kind of program elements that may possibly be included in the park. And once they received the comments, this is the preliminary sketch that is in front of you so that you have something to respond to. Just so that you know, we anticipate a second study session, so this will not be the last opportunity for you to talk about before it comes for a decision. So we do anticipate another study session on this. As you can see, the park is a mix of active and passive uses, and I'm going to let the applicant go and describe the process through which they have been thinking about this park. And what I will do for you is to kind of describe the comments that they have been received, and also see how it conforms to our PUD, as well as the Parks and Recreation plan that we have. So the community meeting was held in the end of May at the Hyatt House Hotel. Around about 25 people attended, including Commissioners Keller and Donaldson. One of the comments, the main comment I would say, is that this was comment by a number of citizens was to retain the existing connection through the park from Christie Avenue to the public market. There was a need to create space for a dog park as well as children's play area, and the suggestion was that these two features should be to the north of the park. It was also commented that in addition to children's play area and the dog park, that we should not forget to leave space for people to relax in solitude and basically hang out. Importance of good lighting was emphasized. The Parks and Recreation Committee comments are as follows. They had specific recommendations at their meeting. One was to eliminate the existing stage, create mini plazas at entrances, and that should include seating areas, create active lawn space to accommodate the movie screenings that the city holds, create hardscape for group exercise activities, create public art pieces instead of using standard play equipment, include lighting and power outlets to accommodate special events as and when they may happen, and to save the existing magnolia trees to the extent possible, and to make a design provision to allow children and I suppose people in general to enter the park from the south end. Currently that parcel is owned by the city, and it's a site for affordable housing unit. And in the future, we anticipate a housing project adjacent to this park. The project was also reviewed by staff at the DCC meeting. One suggestion that was made was that they should show optional plans, a plan that completely redesigns the park, a second that retains the existing park as it is and combines it with the design for the new portion, and a third that is a mix of the first two. It was suggested that the play area should be incorporated as the key feature of the park, and this would be in keeping with the city's policy goal of creating family-friendly housing, which I believe the Commission is also a big fan of, to create family-friendly housing. There was a suggestion to include some kind of a playground, such as a half basketball court, as it was thought that this would keep the park active at all throughout the day, essentially, and throughout the week as well. It was noted that the trees cannot be planted on the sewer easement running north and south at the southern boundary of the park. And it was suggested to save the trees to the extent possible. And it was made, and it was the public, not the public works, but the plan check engineer indicated that there are ADA requirements now that apply for recreation facilities such as a park. So the applicant kind of needs to heed to that. So in terms of conformity to the general plan and the consistency with this program with the approved PUD and PDP, well, the general plan designation for the existing park is park/open space, and that for the expansion area is mixed use with residential. And the zoning for the existing park is again park open space, and for the expanded area is PUD, and part of that PUD locates a park in this area. In terms of the park itself, it conforms with the PDP in terms of location, size, and the inclusion of pedestrian access through the park connecting Christie Avenue to the public market. The approved PDP also included a 6,000 square feet retail pad within the park. There's a typo there. This retail pad is omitted from the proposal at this point. We do believe the proposed park is in compliance with the PDP as there is adequate retail uses surrounding the park itself. So we have Parks and Recreation Plan, which highlights Christie Avenue Park as one of the possible parks in the city. And when the plan was drafted, they knew that the PUD included the expansion of this park, so they did have that information. And the plan's recommended park program includes a variety of features, and these include play for children, socializing and relaxing, picnicking and lunch, special events, arts and cultural activities, and respite and solitude. The plan's potential program elements include recreation with dogs and games. There are some, the plan includes certain site recommendations, and these are that to integrate, where possible, art to create play features, develop park, the portion of the 62nd Street, which is along Christie Avenue and the 64th and Christie residential project, to create areas where these are like plazas, and there you have seating arrangements there. They also, the plan also recommends to consider programming multi-use turf area for small dog off-leash play during low-use hours. So that so there are certain issues to be considered that we would want the Commission to give us some input on. One is regarding program elements. Right now, the program elements that are included is a dog park, a lawn area for special events, and children's play area. Does the Commission think that these elements are appropriate for the site? Does the Commission wish to add or exclude any element? And does the Commission think if there is adequate space for respite and solitude? The second is the play area. What we want to hear from you is regarding whether there should be more hardscaped area to create active play area and program space for older children, such as a half basketball court. In terms of the options, like I mentioned earlier, at the DCC, there was a recommendation that there be some optional plans, and we would like to hear would the Commission support this, and would they want to see optional park designs. In terms of landscape materials, we would like to hear from you if you have any preferences for the plant palette for the park, and would you like to see all existing healthy magnolia trees be preserved, or would you want to see the preservation as they can be accommodated? And if you can have a clear direction, that would be helpful. In terms of retail pad, like I mentioned, the PDP includes a 6,000 square foot retail pad within the park. The proposed design does not include this pad. Is this exclusion of retail pad okay with the Commission? So that concludes my presentation, and we are here to get comments from you on the issues that I just noted, as well as any other design or any other issues that may come to your mind. And like I mentioned, we anticipate having a second study session. So at that time, you would see a more refined design for the park based on the comments that they hear from you. And the applicant does have a presentation, and they will walk you through their thinking process in terms of what they consider possible for this park. So if you have any questions for me, I would be happy to answer. Otherwise, we do have the applicant here with the presentation.
Are there any plans or just even like a general layout plan for the site to the south, the affordable housing site?
No, we do not have. But this site is completely within the city's control, so it will happen. It's not caught up in the redevelopment chaos.
I'm just wondering if we know where we want that path to connect.
We have no idea. There's no RFP that has been even issued at this point. So it's pretty, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Did I miss?
Were you speaking about the Christie Avenue parcels?
Yes.
The one adjacent to it.
Yeah, those are not caught up in the state's issue with the property management plan. They're not part of that. So we do have the ability to go ahead and put those up for development right now. And in fact, the City Council is going to be having a study session on September 16th about the disposition of those properties.
I get my question was more specific to the layout of this park, and is there any way to, if the park comes first, have the development tie into the park where we're showing a pathway stopping at that site right now, or one of the scenarios I saw does?
Well, I think Miro mentioned that at the south side of the park there is a 15-foot, it's actually not an easement, it's actually a separate parcel that is also owned by the city. And all the utilities are I don't know if they still do, but previously, all the utilities for the public market went through there. Because back in the day when the public market was first developed, before Shellmount Street existed, yeah, right there, the Christie Avenue was actually the only frontage that the public market had. And so the previous proposal for the property immediately to the south, which was the previous owner was Ted Dang, he had an approval for a residential project on that site that then obviously never ended up getting built. And that project did have a number of residential units on the ground floor whose front doors went right out into the park, and they would go across that easement strip. So I think any redesign of the park could accommodate a similar arrangement, and in fact that 15-foot strip that's immediately adjacent to that parcel has to be kept clear of any major construction. It can't have any trees in it, and it can't have any substantial structures in it. So it kind of dictates that it's going to be left open. The only real issue with it is that, at least as regard to the Dang proposal, was that the grades, the ground floor, finished floor elevations of the building and that strip didn't exactly match, and so there had to be some sort of contortions with some ramps and some, you know, kind of like if you can envision what Summer Thai has, that kind of depressed entrance on Hollis Street. It was a similar kind of a deal to that. Not insurmountable, but I think that certainly a park design, any park design here could accommodate whatever access has to come, you know, to the north from that parcel to the south.
And I think it's also worth noting that any, project on that site would most likely have to come before the commission for a major design review. So I think, us or our successors would not look favorably upon a project that didn't appropriately address the park.
Plus, it's owned by the city. We will issue the RFP. We have some control over what kind of designs that, even before it comes to the Planning Commission.
We own the park and we own that piece of property, so we've got lots of control over how it ends up getting designed.
So I have two questions. The first is, what was the motivation for requesting different park plans that incorporated the features of the existing park?
Well, there was a comment made during the community meeting, albeit by just one individual, but very strongly so, who mentioned that the park as it existed in its form was perfect and that she did not want to see any change. And the motivation also, I mean, besides that, I think the motivation behind is to give an idea for the decision makers how it can look. So if you have, depending on the kind of comments that they receive, they can incorporate that in different ways, and you will have choices. Like I mentioned, that there is a second study session. So that was mainly the thinking behind.
But just for clarity, but the applicant would fund improvements to the entire park as part of the Marketplace project, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my second question is, I'm just trying to remember sort of the entitlement history and process to come for the Marketplace project. So if I remember correctly, there is an approved PDP, but the commission still needs to approve or adopt or whatever the FDP, which would sort of include the configuration of this park, right, as well as the configuration of the rest of the site.
Correct. So
but it's not one FDP.
Yeah, it's
There's a separate FDP for each proposal, each phase, each piece.
Building.
So the park would be its own separate FDP.
Okay.
64th and Christie building currently under construction got an FDP. This would get an FDP. Each subsequent building would get its own FDP.
So I guess my question then is the shape of the park, the configuration of the park is not that's in play too. That's not something that's approved, correct?
Correct. You mean what you're looking on the screen, whether this is the exact, well, the location, I mean, there'll be a little, you can trigger it, you can jiggle a little bit, but this is the area of expansion, and the total area would be what it is.
But the FDP that ultimately comes before you for the park will dictate the shape of it. And it's based on their proposed future building layouts.
Okay, let me ask another question then. What are the parameters that have been approved? The amount of park expansion, is that the size of the park expansion? Is that something that's already been approved?
So this is what is approved. So this is the marketplace at build out. So when I check for this FDP's compliance, what I will be looking at, among other things, is whether the park that is being proposed right now, is it in this location? Is it about this size? Now, whether it is a rectangular or whether it is slightly, not a perfect rectangular, that's just minor deviation. But the key thing that I'll be looking for is the location and the size. And the fact that it does have this retail pad, which is a question that I have posed for you. So this is what was approved at PDP.
There is actually already one change which affects the park, and that is that when the FDP for the 64th and Christie building was approved, that roadway that is next to it, which is the future 63rd Street, is actually shown in the PUD as not being where the current drive aisle is. If you notice, it lines up with the driveway of Avenue 64 across the street, but in reality it doesn't line up with that. The building footprint is smaller than that, and the roadway is a little bit to the north. So that means that the park area to the south of that roadway is bigger. It also, the PDP doesn't show any additional buildings there. There's supposed to be a park on the opposite side of that roadway from that 64th and Christie building, but it does show an area, a defined area for the new park. So because the roadway has been moved to the north, that means the park basically has become longer and skinnier.
Okay.
In order to have the same area. That's why it has that kind of wedgy shape to it.
Uh-huh.
I had a question. So one of the staff comments was that the plan check engineer noted that the applicant should be aware that there are now ADA requirements for recreation that might apply to the project. So can you elaborate on what those might be, or were they discussed at all?
He did not elaborate at the meeting, and he usually says, just ask the applicant to come and talk to me. So he did not elaborate, so I don't know what those ADA requirements are.
I know there's ADA requirements for traditional play structures about accessibility and landing pads and ramps in and out of the play area and things like that. If you're using berming and landforms and art elements and calling them play equipment, I don't know how that exactly translates, but it...
Yeah, that's my concern there. Okay.
So if there's no further questions? Okay.
Thank you. Then we'll...
I'll hand it over to the applicant. Oh, this is not yours. Sorry.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Mark Steffen. I'm the president of City Center Realty Partners, the owner and developer of the public market. We're happy to be in front of you tonight to talk about the park. Just a couple of comments I want to make before I turn it over to our architects. In developing this plan that you'll see tonight, we spent considerable effort, time to make sure we incorporated the desires of the community. And I think as you look at our plan, you'll see that we did incorporate what we heard at the public meeting as well as the Parks and Recs meeting. Maru was right. There was one woman who said she'd like to see it the way it was, but the more than general consensus at that meeting was they wanted to see a renovated and updated park. And we also heard at the Parks and Rec meeting, we talked about sort of play structures like the basketball court, and that didn't seem to be something that the Parks and Recs wanted to see there. Well, I can't quite remember what the next point is, but it'll come to me later. But with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to our architects, Aaron Ashley and Ann Howerton from Hart Howerton.
I don't know. Thanks. Nice to see you again. We were here, I guess, several months ago, and we've seen several of you at the community meetings and other times since. We spent a lot of time with Charlie, Maru, and the rest of staff thinking about the project in general and working through a lot of issues that come with a PDP that was made in a slightly different era. Maru gave a pretty thorough introduction, so I won't belabor that, but just to remind you of where we are at. The original PDP is the outside line. The 64th and Christie building was the first phase of that. The Christie Park is a out parcel, but was always considered under the PDP as something that would be improved. And there were some preliminary ideas in that PDP, which we've reviewed and considered as we've gone through our own process. The current direction for the ultimate build-out of the marketplace site is a series of individual parcels of mix of uses, shopping, office, residential, with the expanded park along Christie. We tried to canvass, Ann and I both live here in the East Bay and spend a lot of time in the parks around town, and we wanted to make sure we were up to speed on how this park would sit within the larger kind of context of parks in Emeryville. And in red is the current size of Christie Park, and a good comp is the Doyle Hollis Park. And in fact, it's really a very immediate comp in both sort of dimension and size, both about 1.25 acres. The demographics, I guess you could argue, around the parks are maybe different today, and there's certainly a question of how that'll evolve as the marketplace and surrounding parcels get built out, and I think that's definitely something we'd appreciate your feedback on. One of the challenges of describing the park today and understanding the future case is today the park is surrounded by very little but a 2-story gym. You have the sort of lawn area in front of PPP. You have the 4 to 5-story building under construction. You also have a number of uses and a number of users that are very accustomed to the layout here, especially this diagonal path through the park. And that's something we heard frequently at our community meetings. The future case of the parcel is very much one of a very urban park. The city-owned parcel, which we presume to be in the 5 to 6-story height, but frankly could be anything, I guess. The potential of mixed-use buildings and residential buildings on the marketplace site, all in the kind of 5 to 6-story, 85 foot probably at the highest. So the character of this thing becomes quite different. Again, the PDP as it was sort of configured, and it's a little different because all the roads are different. The park was sort of ending here and was a little fatter. It was kind of more similar to the width of the park as it is today. And it also had a 6,000-foot retail pad in it. We have preserved the area that was anticipated in the PDP, although you get an extra 6,000 feet, I guess, without the retail pad, as we're looking at it. Mark and his team are retail guys, and I think the project as a whole has been couched in an understanding of retail, and we really believe that the new retail and the existing and updated retail of the public market will be sufficient, and a restaurant in this location or a retail pad in this location would not be terribly successful. So instead, giving more area to dedicated park space seemed to be a win for everyone. A little bit on kind of what's out there today. There's a lot of folks who come and use the park at different times of day. We've heard at the community meeting there's maybe some unsavory folks that use the park at night. The lighting and the physical conditions are maybe not conducive to the feelings of safety. So what we heard time and again is make it real easy for us to get across the street. We know this crosswalk has had some serious issues over the years, but make it real easy to get to the public market, to shop, get over to Amtrak. That is the real usage corridor. There's a recognition that at different times of the day, there's a lot of different users, and that the berm that's there today and described by this hatch and the hardscape to the south don't maximize the utilization of the area out there today. And so maybe there's a different configuration that's I don't know, more welcoming, more protecting, and more open, less nerve-wracking if you're walking through and as the sun's down. There are a number of trees out there today. For the most part, and Ann will get into this in much more detail, they're parking lot trees, and the healthiest of which are along the north edge of the park today, the south edge of the parking lot, and there's some magnolias. I don't know that we think they're specimen magnolias, but there's certainly some of the healthier trees out there, and we think our proposed strategy will find them a healthier home. And lastly, the park is a noisy, windy place, and I think it's easy to forget that if you don't walk across it on a regular basis. But between the height of PPP and some of the other buildings, the height of the tower at the office building at the public market, the noise of the freeway, and so one of the things we're challenged with is how do you create a place for a community to really spend time and enjoy themselves at a place that sometimes the physical conditions are not super conducive to. Again, kind of keeping track of what's there today versus what the future condition will be. Today the park gets great morning sun and on the whole park, and good all-day sun on the southern half of the park. And PPP certainly casts a long shadow, what you're seeing here, in the afternoons. At build-out, the city parcel has the potential to cast a pretty long shadow on the southern half of the park, and that's something we're trying to be mindful of as we look at this. But the area of the park that gets sun all day happens to be adjacent to where we envisioned a plaza and the connection to the public market, and consequently an area where more kid and family, friendly activities would take place. And so some of that park programming is driven by the physical conditions. The last thing that I don't have a slide for, but just wanted to reiterate, is that everything under the ground is pretty nasty. And we know this, and it's amazing to see the magnolia trees as healthy as they are, given what they're growing in. And so a condition of what we're looking at is how to create a place that's more welcoming for trees and using trees in the right way. With that, I'll turn it over to Ann.
Okay, that's the only button I need to know,
Just
right?
that one.
Hi, everyone. Delighted to be here. Look.
Can you speak into the microphone, please?
Yes, I will. We're delighted to be here again, and we look forward to your further feedback and discussion. We are engaged in a process, as you know, and we're listening very hard, and we're trying to be responsive here and create something that is going to contribute to Emeryville as a whole and to this community and emerging and developing neighborhood as well. So with that, we're going to transition a little bit and talk specifically more about the ideas that are brewing in our minds as we think about the specific design of the park, holding back from presenting you with the design because we're still investigating and talking about it and thinking about it. But I would like you to think about, in particular, that sun and shade diagram we had a minute ago, because it really creates a pattern of use and potential use as we think about what goes where. And we can always drop back and look at those slides again. So let's move forward. This is just to recap in detail what the scale of that berm is. In fact, what we heard is that the kind of questionable areas on the slide to the left, where there's some late night activity going on and some calls to the policeman. And this is crossing the park. Everybody does it. It was very strong in the community reaction that it's highly utilized, very important to everyone, and the request for lighting was made over and over again. This is where the expansion will expand in the direction of this parking lot that's screened off currently during construction. There's a pretty good example of how well London Plains are not doing on the site. And in fact, at the PPP, the Pacific Park Plaza, directly across on Christie, no trees grow. And we had this conversation with a number of people who showed up at the community meeting. So there is great concern for a high water table, some pretty nasty soils, and swirling winds on the site, which in fact they commented make it not a great concert location, just kind of hit and miss. So let's speculate a little bit about what Christie Park can be. These are some slides that we already showed to the community people and again to the Parks and Rec Committee, just to engage, just to say, we are working with the 2011 Emeryville strategic park plan. There were certain kinds of uses that were written down in that plan. Let's start by confirming if that's what everybody still wants. And in fact, this particular slide resonated with any number of community people who stayed after the meeting, who commented during the meeting and said, you know, this is how I would use the park. I want to come out, hang out on an edge, observing, but perhaps doing my own thing. It's about that respite and solitude. Older user group, admittedly. Here's another one that resonated, got some chuckles because I mixed canine and feline references at the time. At any rate, there's clearly a dog user group. It's not specifically small dogs or large dogs, it's all kinds of dogs, although the PPP has a requirement or restriction that they be small. So this is just a fun park in New York City where we have, our firm has an office, and you can see it's quite engaging even for people who don't have dogs. So as we think about these socializing opportunities proximate to entrances, and shall we be unleashed and regulated, or shall we dedicate a little space, or, you know, that conversation can be engaged. Here's another fun detail. It's really kind of fun to see what happens if you put a little bit of water and you can drain it. This is a famous urban park, loved park in Philadelphia. It's called Rittenhouse Square. It's surrounded by high-rise office buildings. My own kids went to school and lived nearby. I've spent a lot of time there, and it's amazing to see how a beloved park can flex and accommodate a lot of users. Here, it's a routine for many people to come out and get out of their apartments and sit in the park, chat, read, just get out in the open space and enjoy a patch of sun or a patch of shade, as you can see here. And this is something closer to home. This is Santa Rosa. It's obviously a small events going on. People brought their own chairs or sat on the grass. They're circling around and looking at something that's going on. Perhaps it's a music event, like we heard has been put on in the existing Christie Park from time to time. Again, to recall the dimensions, I mean, if you think of this in terms of tennis courts, you know, we're sort of like on the right side, we're a little longer than the tennis court, and on the left side, we're exactly like 2 tennis courts or 3 tennis courts. All in all, it's still less than 6 tennis courts. It's a small space. If we fill it with too many dedicated uses, and they preempt the flexibility, which is also part of the mandate of the strategic plan, I feel that we may end up with an even smaller park in effect. So something to think about. Can I go back for a minute? I just want to go back and say that dashed line is more or less where those magnolias are. So as you think about the right side and its dimensions and the left side and its dimensions, and that line of magnolia trees pretty much forms a cordon that separates and bifurcates the park and prevents some other things happening perhaps. So again, this is just a resummarization of what we found in the program recommendations of the 2011 City of Emeryville strategic plan. And the one thing we didn't put in because it was too wordy was the phrasing about the dogs. And at that time, the thought was do something to accommodate some, as an area perhaps, some off-leash play. What we did hear, though, in the community reaction was, yes, there are a lot of dogs, and you know, maybe there should be a space, maybe it should be at the north side. Yes, there could be some children in the future, maybe those two conflict. Let's think about it some more. And then we got a little more feedback on that from the Parks and Rec Committee. And I guess a little time has passed. These things have come on and been tested in some other locations like the Temescal Park. And they said, yes, we think it should be enclosed, but small scale. So that was feedback that was specific on that element. The conversations about play for children have been interesting. No one has come forward and said absolutely needs to be playground equipment. There would seem to be a resonance with the community to explore the idea of incorporating art, letting it be more flexible. The idea of nature elements drew a strong response from any number of individuals. Let me just click through some slides here to help that kind of come to light. So these are just bubbles, and of course we could shuffle them around, but just in general, there's some obvious things. There's a coffee shop. There's some morning sun. Could be that hanging out could be happening on the north end of things. There is a bus stop. Of course, we've got all our circulation and our access connections here mapped out. Social gatherings, maybe that needs a Frisbee space, a picnic lawn, you know, those sorts of things. So it's going to move in from those other busier areas. Event opportunity, that seems to link up to our Plaza Street, the fact that there's going to be a pulsing pedestrian street and retail hub and a marketplace that probably has vendor events, and that it's going to be very lively up there and could just naturally spill to an event opportunity taking place in the park simultaneously. Here's some ideas, just again, you know, what do great parks do? They accommodate recreation, dog walking, sitting around, chatting, having coffee, strolling with a baby, with a toddler. Again, this is our edges, our preliminary thoughts on the edges, and this was confirmed through conversations with the local residents, is that that berm actually doesn't prevent the wind from coming into the park. The park is in a pattern that's created by just the onshore breezes and it's aggravated by the towers, and it does in fact swirl. So what we can do to accommodate some shelter, their suggestion was localize it to a plaza where exercise could occur, or to a few benches here and there. It would be a nice thing to get out of the wind sometimes. Here's an example of where you can sculpt an edge, maybe not this many trees, but the point is the shape doesn't allow seeing into the park or using the shape of the berm itself, but gives some definition to the edges of a park. This example is in Mission Bay in San Francisco. This again is Mission Bay, San Francisco. Using grasses in a shoreline condition is sort of an obvious choice, and of course we have some great native grasses that would do very well in the wind, and that are also drought tolerant, low maintenance, and all of those good things. Trees, not to belabor it, we're going to use a horticulturist with a soils background. This is Nelda Matheny. She's known nationally. She's really known in the Bay Area. She knows her stuff, and she's helping us already, and she's going to help us figure it out. I would say this doesn't need a potpourri of botanical garden kind of plantings. It needs to be simple, highly usable, attractive, easy to maintain for the city, and stay on our mandate of being flexible. And we'll need to elevate where the trees go. We've got soil volumes to consider. There'll be good soils, good drainage, and at the same time we're elevating them into the wind, and you know, what should that be? This is an example of a great tree. We would be lucky if we could achieve this. I would say I'm not being cynical here. I don't think that's on the table. So I think it's more important that we create a great sense of the space, sculpting the edges, using appropriate plantings, and something shorter that can be masked, that can help to define the edges, and perhaps some of the magnolias, and we'll get into that in a minute. This is, again, back to something that's been done recently in the Mission Bay area, and the sculpting, the lawn areas that are used for any number of things. Here are our entrances again. We're mindful of that. We're very interested in trying to respond to the new information on the city affordable housing lot. We don't know a lot, and you know what we know, which is that it hasn't been designed yet, but certainly our intention is not to close off that opportunity to connect. Entrances can be places for social gatherings. So this is, again, an example back to Rittenhouse. This is a place where the adjacent apartments have young families of graduate students primarily, and they come out here with their youngsters and hang out at this tiny little sculpture with a built-in seat. And it's really quite charming, and it's of no considerable scale, and it's set just inside the park entrance. Here's where messages can occur, and we will have to decide how to regulate the pet situation to keep it clean for everyone else. Our thinking still is concerned with creating an interesting and direct but somewhat interesting connection across the park. That came up in discussions again with the neighbors. They said, let something happen on the way across the park. We'll get into that in a minute. Multi-use. Again, this shows an example of how you can integrate a bit of nature, and yet there's lots of flexible use going on. Here's another thing. It's yoga in the park. Here's exercise using part of a park, some of the hardscape. That was mentioned specifically at the neighborhood community output too, is we'd like to do a little Tai Chi in the park. We probably prefer a little hardscape area. Could it be out of the wind? Here's a kid kicking a ball with his mom. Here's a big event. We have been told by the Parks and Rec Committee that the concert idea is to relieve wear on the Doyle Hollis Park, and it might be as much as 2 times a summer. This is not going to be a weekly situation that's contemplated. That's our understanding. So finally, I'll just leave you with a thought that we have presented twice now, which is that, to be memorable, this park may have a feature, something that's special. It might incorporate an element of art that's artistic. Certainly natural is our inclination. And its location is not final. It depends on all these other things that have to settle into the pattern of the overall use. But if it migrates to the one patch of all-day sun, or if it is iconically arranged over toward the side that gets the afternoon sun and can be used by the children in the affordable housing unit, that might be a good thing. So let me just give you a couple of exciting images of other places that have used things like rock forms. This is Central Park, of course. This is closer to home, Lawrence, up at the top in Berkeley, and the kids are climbing on the whale. This is something wonderful done by, I think it's Maya Lin, and it's simply grass in some wonderful configurations. You can see how much fun they're having playing with it. And this is, kids will climb anything, of course. We will think about the ADA compliance issues. I wondered if it had something to do with reflecting on the existing stage, but I'm not certain of that point. So what we heard about Christie Park, just to quickly summarize, it's all on this slide. We put everything down, so this is pretty much a recap of what we've just talked about, and we can come back to this. But basically, the summary discussion with the community was, we wouldn't mind if more active stuff happened to the north. And then we heard from people, well, maybe you ought to consider blending it. And then we went to the Parks and Rec Committee, and we heard that again. So at this point, as you can see, we've got kind of a lawn use area with a flexible core. We're maintaining our socializing opportunities at entrances. We've accommodated an idea for a small fenced dog park, similar in scale to Lake Temescal's. We are setting back any transplanted magnolias from that utility corridor that could be planted or left as hardscape. That's a decision that we need feedback on. And we are trying to connect the park's character with the streetscape that is the proposed outdoor spaces at the existing public market and connecting up to Shell Mound. This is one that wasn't in your packet, and it's really the same diagram I showed you a minute ago. It just made it look a little more real. We're still holding back. This can all change, and of course, we need your feedback. But for scalability, it's a little more realistically drawn so that you have some idea of, gee, if a toddler could take a three-wheeler and say, bye, Mom, and go around, you know, half the park, is there a circuit there, and what would that look like? And are there benches? If we had setting up for a movie in the late afternoon and the kids are still playing on the south end of the park, how would that work? So D shows the accommodation for a screen that could get set up and the movies could be happening, but we haven't blocked that important mid-pathway. Some thoughts on up at B, that because that's all-day sun and because it's the major connection to any events and the marketplace and the retail street, that's going to be a beloved place to hang out in all times of day. Finally, on plant palette, I think the important thing is it's preliminary. It's certainly the lower row is close to what I have in mind. The upper row could all change based on fact-finding about the exact water table and how much we can really elevate as we get into the sculpting of the berms, or whether or not, in fact, we have feedback that that is a solid idea. So I don't want to dwell on it, but I'm trying to provide a flavor so people have some idea of what's in our minds. And with that, I think we're finished with our formal presentation, and we're ready for what's next.
Thank you. Do we have any questions of the applicant or their design team?
I had a question. So on this diagram, we actually do have that in our packet, and one of the questions that I had was on the legend, where were you identifying areas where there would be respite and solitude? That's one of the items that we're being asked to comment on.
Sure. I'm going to use this little tool and explain that I didn't think of it as one place because of the fact that we have shade then sun, sun then shade. It seems to me that people are going to migrate to the microclimate that suits the time of day and perhaps how windy it is. But if I said this, there is, I'm going to trace with my hand, there is a walkability of a path idea that's basically doing all of this. And along this path, I'm thinking there are either benches, or in some cases, we may do that first slide I showed you where there's a seat wall to the berm. Facing the sun, facing activities, but it's on the edge. And in that way, it provides respite and solitude, but also observation. You feel safe, and you're on your way. The other idea is not clearly expressed here, but it's taken from looking at good parks, that on the main travel way, you can also hang out on the edge. So it's an overly wide walkway system, and then the idea is that there would be some benches in here so that you can hang out on that space as well. Other than that, there are these little gathering spaces that are at these entry points, and those, again, depending on activity level, could be a place for just quietly drinking a coffee if you come in from the coffee shop, or coming over from this neighborhood. If they're young families, they might do that thing that we saw at Rittenhouse. Okay. Does that answer it?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question for anyone who is able to answer it, but I'm curious, just for reference, if anybody knows how wide Doyle Hollis Park is.
The dimensions, don't we? We could go back to that slide because we know the dimensions of. Very similar.
Jeez.
Sorry, it's way back.
Oh, we got so many slides. So
There
we're
we go.
160.
Right. They must be about 160 also.
I think they're closer to our narrow dimension.
I do too, actually.
Yeah, maybe a little bit narrower even
Or like
than
120.
if those aerials are the same scale.
They're the same
They
scale.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
You know, and it's interesting because I know you know Doyle, and you can see the dedicated zones and then the kind of the free space, and draw your own conclusions about the balance of dedicated program areas to flex areas, if you will.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. So with that, I think we will open it up for public comment. If there is anyone who would like to speak on this item, please come forward.
I'm John Jackson. I live at Pacific Park Plaza. I have two comments. First, a question about Doyle House. I think it's much larger than 1 1/4 acre. It was originally designed to be 8 acres. The city couldn't acquire all the land it wanted. Do you know, Mr. Bryant, how large Doyle House is?
It's 1 1/4. The office that I work for in my day job designed the park, and it's 1 1/4 acres.
And so the size of Christie as proposed is going to be one comparable, but not the current Christie.
Right.
All right. I would also, we've had meetings in Pacific Park Plaza that were attended by Stephen and Nora Davis and the former principal, I guess, with TMG, which was developer with Denise Pinkston about 2.5 years ago. And we had extensive discussions, and it seems that the belief that this property, that the Ted Dang property, the Commonwealth Realty low-income housing property, which is immediately adjacent to the park, is untouchable. And yet, my understanding is that the right political people could renegotiate, just like money's fungible, land is too, and that requirement for that property to be used for low-income housing could be transferred to some other part of the city. I don't understand why that property and the 2 adjacent southern properties, which are also owned by the city, couldn't be considered for expansion of Christie Park, given the fact that we've now got about 2,000 people who sleep at night in proximity to that park, and we have a requirement in the general plan that calls for 3 acres of land per 1,000 residents, and to be within a 5-minute walk of a park. That's not a target. That is a standard according to the general plan. And so that's my comment.
Thank you.
Could the speakers please sign in on the clipboard after you finish speaking? It's over there in front of Sarah.
Will do.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jerry Copel. I also live in Pacific Park Plaza, and I stare out at this park constantly every day because it's right in front of me. It's the first thing I see every morning, last thing I see every night, so I have a particular interest in that. So I've heard a number of comments about, and I have several items here. First is the trees. I heard there would be a quote, there would be a healthier place for the trees. I believe you commented, and the last diagram that you showed during your presentation had trees around the periphery.
Can you, excuse me, sir, can you address your comments to the commission, please?
I'm sorry. I would like are they called the applicants? I would like the applicants to answer the question of whether or not the trees that are depicted in the last diagram they showed are the very specimens that are currently in the park at the northern end of the existing park. That's my first question. It's not to the commission.
Sir, you have 3 minutes to make your comments.
Okay, so that's a question.
We can ask those questions of the applicant if the commission wishes to ask those questions.
Okay, if they are different trees, then I would suggest that the plan is currently shown there doesn't conform to the request of the residents that the existing trees be preserved. In fact, the trees that are there, and you may not know this unless you, like me, you live there and observe them, they serve as twice a year resting place for migratory birds, being the only trees in that area that serve a purpose of housing large number of migratory birds. So there may be, in fact, some, for all I know, some legal requirement by the state that clumps of trees that are used by migratory birds need to remain where they are. And I'm not an expert, so it's just a question. The other comment, because my 3 minutes are going, would be that I'm not sure exactly what kind of periphery is being considered. Right now, the existing park is not friendly on the eastern side because it feeds directly into parked cars. So if you're sitting on the park benches that are at the northeastern corner of the existing park, your next door neighbor is a line of parked cars. So I would simply request that whatever periphery is built, it be a wall that's acoustic and acoustically and visually separate from the parking lots, the parking lot that's on the east side. Is my time used up?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Stephen Keller, Pacific Park Plaza resident. Just want to make a couple quick comments. You sent in a written comment to all of you and the planning director and the Karen Hempel as well. But I'm really very strongly suggesting that the dog park must be larger than the one at Temescal Park or at Lake Merritt, wherever they were suggesting. It needs to support all dogs in our neighborhood. And our neighborhood is about 40% large dogs and 60% medium to small dogs. Both the apartments at 64th and Christie Commons allow dogs to the size of Labradors, and there are several of those dogs, and they need to be accommodated in the park as well. To me, there is no need to create a space for movies or music type events. This is a waste of space in the park. And money, and the current stage is little used, and when it's attended, and when it is used, it's attended very low. We've had concerts in the park, and you can count the people on your hands that attend that because of the wind and the cold and the shadows. And I think if we want to use it occasionally for those events, that's possible without actually allowing for a movie screening, etc. The park needs to have an architectural presence from the street. It's really quite plain right now, and I really like to see us create a sense of space, a sense of place in that that park. I love the equipment-free activity area. Just don't block the pedestrian path right away with the sculpture or anything. It needs to be kind of a clear, direct path. And do not include any support courts. We don't need a half basketball court. There's one at Temescal Park. There's one at Stanford Park. There's one at the Doyle Hollis Park. Not all parks need to fit every type of activity, and when we're so limited in town, we need to create special zones, I feel. So I don't think a sports court is something that we need there. I love the idea of the Rittenhouse Square. I would love to see something like that become this park. I like the way the plan that she showed at the end of the thing breaks up the uses with the dog park in the north, the children's activity more towards the sunny area. I think the way they've kind of, and this is all just schematic and just the beginning, but I like what they've come up with so far. I think it's a great direction. I don't think we need the retail pad. I think that 6,000 square feet is much more needed. There's plenty of retail and restaurant space in the marketplace in that general area, so I think that having them remove that pad is something we're all very in favor of. And I just think that this is a great start. And if we can save magnolia trees, I think it's something we should do and commendable, but I think the way they are aligned now would terribly limit what we can do in that park. So if we could scatter those around the park, that would be a much better use. And we need to get rid of that berm. The police cannot see into the park, and it's just unusable space. No one uses that. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Dennis Kane. I live at 64th and Christie, and I've lived in Emeryville 6 years. And during that time, you know, Emeryville's changed a lot. There's a lot of people now, and there's a lot of young women with babies and carriages. So we have needs that didn't exist when I first moved in. And this park idea is really terrific. I mean, I'm really glad to see these forward-thinking people. I agree with Stephen on some of these issues. That berm is dangerous. I mean, there are funny people living there at night. You know, the police cannot see when they go down the street there. So from a safety standpoint, it's really glad to see this is going. We don't need a basketball court. We need more area for young women and little kids to play. I was walking today down Christie, and about 10 o'clock, right in front of PPP, there were about 3 or 4 mothers with little kids playing on the grass. We don't have enough of that for these people. You know, we really have to address the new population that's growing. I think it's a great idea what we have here. We can be expanded upon, but I think we're definitely headed in the right direction. So that's my less than 3 minutes talk. Thank you.
Any other speakers?
Chair Moss?
Yes.
Marceline Krafchick, who lives at Pacific Park Plaza, had to leave because she can't drive after dark, and she asked me to read her comments to you, which are, she just wanted to raise the issue of the park as a noise source. She's concerned about that, aside from occasional music programs for hundreds of residents in what does that say? Oh, on for hundreds of residents on Christie. Otherwise, the recommendations look fine.
Thank you. All right, if there are no other speakers, we will close the public comment period. Does anyone, I know that I have a couple of questions that have sort of come out of the public comments. Does anyone else have any questions? Can I go ahead and ask my questions then? I'm trying to remember. So I'm curious about the site adjacent to the city-owned site adjacent to the park on the south side there. Was that site purchased with housing funds? Is that the?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Okay.
The other 2 parcels that are further south on Christie were not. We own everything down to actually just beyond what is called 59th Street.
Okay.
So that 1 parcel was purchased with housing money, the other 2 were not purchased with housing money.
Okay, just to be clear then, so in its role as the successor agency, the city then is obligated to provide affordable housing on that site that was purchased with? Well,
this is one of the issues that we're going to ask the City Council to address in their study session on September 16th, is how to deal with the fact that that 1 parcel was purchased with housing money, and yes, we do have an obligation to provide affordable housing somehow, but it's really a legal question that we haven't had a chance to explore yet, whether it has to be on that parcel or could be spread throughout all of those parcels or even somewhere else in the city. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I look forward to hearing more about that issue. Mm-hmm. And then I did just want to invite the design team up if they wanted to just quickly address the question that was raised about the existing trees.
Sure. Back to that last slide.
Sorry.
So to address the question of what's existing to remain, those are existing trees that are out in the right-of-way of the sidewalk that are to remain. These are transplanted magnolias. It's an idea, because otherwise what we have is a pretty solid line of magnolias right through here. And it really is kind of dividing the park, is my feeling. Here, they're spaced about 40 feet apart, so even, I don't expect them to become gigantic, but they do seem to be doing okay. And in fact, we'll probably continue to take this sort of half-light situation pretty well. So the idea for their placement would be to place them back of the right-of-way in some elevated ground and give them some loving care. And as to the others, they could be placed around the park if that is the recommendation of others, and we're here to seek that input. In terms of what happens in some of the other groups of trees, we have to get into the depths of the arborist report and see which things are healthy, where the grades can be preserved, and so forth. So I'm not taking a strong stance on that at this moment, but certainly we have another round of investigation here, and based on what what suggestions we get out of this meeting, I'll take a closer look at it.
Thank you. And then I just have one more question for staff before we move on to discussion, and that is I read in the staff report and we heard a bit about the recommendations from the Parks and Rec Committee. I'm curious, has the I believe it's the Community Services Department division, have they indicated that they would wish to show outdoor movies in this location to relieve some of the pressure from Doyle Hollis Park?
I don't know directly. Neither Mira nor I was at the Park and Rec Committee, which is staffed by the Community Services Department. Actually, Commissioner Donaldson is on that committee, so maybe you'd had some feedback.
No, they thought it would be a good alternative place because the lawn area at Doyle Hollis gets so overused that it gets beat up, and it could use a little bit more of a break. But I think that they acknowledge that it's not an ideal place. I mean, I don't think they were talking about a fixed stage or a fixed screen or anything like that. I think they were talking about a flexible open space that has the capacity to have one of those things put on. When they do it at Doyle Hollis, they bring in a little stage platform, they bring in a movie screen, they bring in whatever they need, and it's just on an open, flexible lawn space. So I think that's probably what they would have in mind.
Great, thank you.
Chair Moss?
Yes.
With your permission, may I ask a question to the applicant?
Sure.
The question I have is regarding the magnolia trees. If they were to be relocated and replanted either within the park or outside, how viable is that? Because replanting is a very expensive proposition, and whenever you ask landscape architects or other professionals, it's a mixed. It's never clear whether replanting is a good idea or not. So I was wondering what your thoughts on replanting these magnolia trees would be. Because, the easy way of dealing with the issue of whether to preserve the tree or not is to say, let's replant it. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Good point. I haven't looked into this in detail with a consultant, which is what I would do. I'll use a good arborist, I'll get a good finding, I can report back on this matter. So rather than speculate, I think I should take under advisement that we'll figure out if it's a viable option. Okay. And it may well be. I've certainly transplanted many large trees in my career, so I do think it's viable for the park. In terms of going and throwing it in another parking lot, I don't know if that makes sense. They're growing in a row fairly densely, and my thought was to find the most viable candidates and use them. To also consider if leaving anything in place makes any sense once we settle on a direction for the design.
Chair Moss, I do have one little bit of information. I checked the assessor parcel map for Doyle Hollis Park. And it says it's slightly different from either end, but on the Doyle Street end, it's about 125 feet, and at the other end, it's about 120. However, the assessor data also says that the park is 0.87 acres, or that parcel, that block is 0.87 acres. So I suspect that some of the park is actually within public right-of-way. So that dimension of 125 may not be quite right.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I think with all of that, we can open it up for discussion.
You want to start?
Well, I think it needs a more defined play area for children than we're seeing at this point, possibly with equipment that children can play on, and that's about the only comment I have at the moment.
I guess if we're going to go in order, yeah, I would agree with that. You know, you said no one was saying there absolutely needs to be, you know, play equipment, and I don't want to say that either, but I want to come pretty close to saying that. Which is just that, you know, when I look at other parks, like, you know, just to use the parks we have here in Emeryville, Temescal Creek Park and Doyle Hollis Park, I think that is one of the key elements that brings people to the park, that makes it a destination, is the play equipment, the equipment structures. And I'm really sympathetic to the notion that you know, children are adaptable and will play on whatever is there and use a variety of things. I think that is true. But I think in a location like this, with a park of this scale, I think you still need something that's going to bring a lot of activity to the park. I think those types of uses tend to be more spontaneous, and, you know, the children might happen to be in the park and they might happen to use what's there. But I really want something that is going to bring people, you know, bring small children and their families to this park. And so I do think there needs to be some more organized equipment. Also, I actually really like the scale of the dog park. I use the one at Temescal Creek Park on a weekly basis. I love the size of it. I mean, I wouldn't want it to be any smaller, but it's good for all kinds of dogs. It's I have a medium-sized dog and a small dog, and they're quite frequently the smallest dogs in the park. And so I really, you know, I don't mind the scale of it, but I do mind. I think the shape of it in this rendering it sort of makes for a lot of underutilized space. I don't think round is the best utilization. It just looks like it's taking up a lot of space on that end of the park that I think could be better utilized. So just in looking at the diagram and looking at this slide that's up there now, it seems to me like it kind of wants to be, like that dog park kind of wants to be to the, well, whatever, in this diagram, to the right of that sort of whale sculpture. But I realize also that's, you know, one of the areas that was sunny all the time, so I'm necessarily going to take up all the sunny area for it. But I think it'll just in general, it'll work much better as a rectangle, a longer, narrower piece like the one at Temescal Creek Park is right now. What else? I just in general, I like the configuration of the park. I like the lawn areas. I think they're, you know, I love the lawn at Doyle Hollis Park. I think it functions really well. It's informal, but it still allows for a pickup soccer game or a pickup ultimate frisbee game, and you see it really well utilized as a result of that. So I would hope that this lawn would be similarly well utilized. As far as the trees, I would definitely want more information. I appreciate that you said you would commission an arborist report, and I would definitely want a well-done arborist report that was peer-reviewed by the city's arborist to tell us the condition of those trees. You know, it makes me concerned that, you know, to talk about those magnolias, and it sounds like despite all of the obstacles, they're actually doing fairly well. So I would hate to lose them, but I realize they're in a very unideal position for the expansion of this park. So, you know, maybe one or two can be saved in the existing location as things get designed. You know, and we'll see if the rest can be relocated or what. I also want to be conscious of the health of the trees. I just, you know, as an example, I will use 40th Street. I think
that's a great example. There are a lot of really spindly London planes along 40th Street. They're of very little value, I think. And where new projects have gone in and those trees have, new trees have been planted in a different location, it's really like a long age song. It's really a dramatic change. The new trees that are there already, to me, have immensely more value than the spindly trees that were existing, even though they're older. So I know tree planting technology has changed a lot in the last decade or two, and so I would definitely want more information on those types of things. Are the trees that are there existing, or, do they have capacity to grow to their fullest? Are new trees going to grow and develop better, quicker than the existing trees? Those types of questions. I think that in general, those are my questions. I just jotted down something. I just want to make sure I addressed it. Yeah. So I think that concludes my questions or my comments, and I'll just pass the comments along.
Well, having been at 2 previous meetings, I think you are hearing a lot and you're listening a lot and you're reflecting what you're hearing really well, and I appreciate that. I like the permeability from the edges. I think the entry areas as gathering spaces is good, and both the physical access and visual access into the park is really important. I think that you can use the pathways to create those spaces, the eddy spaces for people to sit in quiet, by themselves quietly, and people may walk by or not, and that's fine. I think it's worth exploring. There's so many different kinds of creative play equipment out there that it's worth looking at some of them. There's just all of these new designs all the time that are less, they're not the traditional monkey bar things. The things in Doyle Hollis Park are used all the time. It's just all the time. And that flexible lawn space, I think, is really versatile. And I live across the street from Doyle Hollis Park, and I sit there every weekend, look out the window, and it's just really, really well used. And it's partly because there are those flexible spaces, and there's places for small groups and larger groups, and every weekend there's a bouncy house or 2 bouncy houses, which beats the lawn up, but it's really well used park. And some of the relationships in that park, I think, can inform what's going on here as far as the dedicated area where there's activity. In this case, not a basketball court, but a dog park. That's going to attract one group of people, and they're going to flow over to other parts of the park, or maybe other family members are going to use another part of the park while they've got the dog in the dog park. So I think that there's a lot of things that are working really well here. I do think the play stuff is important. I think the dog park would be a really well-used area. I think that it really is going to depend on a serious arborist study to figure out what to do about the trees. They really aren't in a place where it works very well for expanding the park. And one thing that occurred to me when you were talking about how closely together they're planted and growing, that really makes me wonder how much harder it would be to transplant them, because they're going to be having entwined roots, and it's just... It's a shame. I would hope that some of them can be preserved, but if they can't all be preserved and something else can grow and Nelda can figure out how to make it grow, that would be, I think, preferable to have more trees with a better chance than trying to move something that is not likely to do so well. I think it's nice to see a couple of alternatives of the way the elements can be arranged, but I don't see a need to show that configuration that's there now, because I just don't think it works. I don't think it works well at all. I think it doesn't. There's so much unusable space in that park. There's such limited visibility into that park. I don't think there's any reason to pursue that design as part of this going forward. And as far as the retail pad goes, there's going to be plenty of retail that can spill out into this, especially if it's well connected to the plaza area that is planned in the future. So I would love to see a real strong connection on that that eastern central area where that connects with the park, so activity can flow in and out. That's my comments.
Okay, as far as the program elements are concerned, I think that it really does incorporate everything that's there. I wouldn't eliminate anything from the current programming. I think that there should be some slight modifications, like the lawn area / movie screening area. I don't think that it necessarily needs to be that large, especially if it's not going to be used that frequently for movie screenings. I do like that the dog park and the children's play area are situated where they are, because the feedback that I've heard from children is that they actually prefer to be away from dogs. They're not all that keen about having the dog park right next to their play area. As far as the shape of the dog park, I would definitely like to see some alternative designs for that as opposed to the round. Let's see, for the play area, I think that the size of the area is really good. I would not like to see it reduced, and I definitely want to see, I agree with the comments that I've heard so far about providing play space, and I understand that there tends to be, or at least there was said to be, an older crowd in that area, but that really is changing, and we definitely need to acknowledge that and encourage people with families, because the demographics of Emeryville are changing, and there are younger folks here who are going to start families, and they already have, and they are living on that side of town. So I definitely want to support keeping this park as a place that will attract children, as well as folks that don't have children. As far as the berms versus the play structure, I kind of want both, and I have children, age 9 and 10, and my husband's on the Parks and Recs Committee, so I'm not sure what he said about the play structure, but I do know, I was surprised to think, well, he didn't support that, but I'm the one who takes him to the park. So, and what the feedback that I get is, we don't want to go to that park because there's no swings, or we don't want to go to that park because there's no structure, or we want to go to the natural park area. So they actually like both. So if there were a way we could incorporate the berms with some sort of play structure as well, I think that that would, fit the needs. Kids are very adaptable. They're going to play on anything regardless of what's there, but it will be easier to, I think it will attract more children if there is a play structure, and we can also address some of the ADA concerns so that there aren't kids that are excluded by the berm situation. One thing that I've found over the years is that with the kids that I know and my kids, they really like the kind of labyrinth feel. And when I looked at the berms, I thought, yeah, this would be great for that. It's not a literal translation with box hedges, but it's kind of a natural sort of flowy place. They're going to run around through it and play tag and everything like that. So I think that's really positive part of this design that I would like to see brought forward. Would I like to see optional designs? I think that this design looks really well. As far as options, I would definitely like to see different configurations on the dog park scheme, a little more fleshing out of the art as play structure element. And with that, would definitely like to see the shadow studies updated the next time that we see the presentation. So if you move things around, we definitely want to see how the lighting and the daylighting is going to shine on those areas. I didn't really have any comments on the landscape materials. I think, or the question was really relative to whether we save the magnolia trees or not, and I think it's really going to be dependent on what the arborist says. We're not going to move them to East BayBridge Center. As far as the retail pad, I don't think that it needs to be there. We have plenty of retail there as it is, so I think that it can be excluded. My concern is that if we have a retail pad just plopped there, that it will be hard to keep a tenant there. It will be, it could end up being empty quite a bit, or just having a slew of different tenants that have a high turnover. We don't really want to see that. Yeah, I think that's it. That's all I had. Nice job.
Yeah, a lot of the successful park examples that you showed in your slides were ones that were not trying to be everything to everybody. They picked sort of one main approach and might have had some other periphery elements to them. And so I think that there's some components of this, like the performances or movies or whatever, that might not even, I don't know. I would actually look to take some things out to give it more breathing room. I think right now, Doyle Hollis Park is one of those parks that does try to be everything to everyone. And last time I was there were, I think I was tossing frisbee, and there were people playing volleyball, and there were cookout and skateboarding and kids playing, and everything just overlapping with everything else, and it has a very chaotic feel to it that if you're looking for relaxation, it's not the place to go. If you're looking for a place to read a book, it's not the place to go. And so trying to figure out how to strike that balance is going to be a key component to it. And having more trees, I don't know, and I'm sure you'll find out how you can, what trees will work, how you can make it work. But creating that environment, I think trees create a real sense of shelter and reflection and privacy that if you have just trees on the perimeter and not trees sort of intermingled throughout, you'll have a hard time creating that kind of relaxing environment. Let's see here. As far as the kids' play structure, sculptures go, I do like the idea of using art or natural elements as play structures. You get away from I've put in a lot of play structures, and the one thing you're always limited by is just they're designed nowadays to deal with liability to the point that a lot of the activities that you can actually do are pretty limited, but then you put in some rocks or some logs or whatever else, and all of a sudden those don't fall within the same legal grounds, and kids can go crazy there, and it's a lot of fun. So trying to find that balance, I think will be nice. And I know you put the whale sculpture in from the Lawrence Hall of Science, but I think having sculptures or play structures that do feel less museum-like and more natural will be nice. Andy Goldsworthy-like, or some of the things that you find in the Presidio. The plaza, and this came up as part of the overall discussion previously, and I think there've been, a lot of us, I think it sounded like we felt like the idea that maybe being closed off to vehicular traffic and actually operating primarily as a plaza. And I would love to see, through the type of paving, maybe pavers or something along those lines, that plaza really bleed into that park in a way that is, it feels like one continuous progression from the plaza into the park.
That's a good idea. It's a really good idea.
Yeah, and the one slide you did show, I think it was your first slide, with the seat walls, and they were in the landscape. Mm-hmm. And so they weren't seat walls just on the side of a sidewalk, which obviously you're going to need some of that as well. But I like that seat wall in the landscape area element, because not everybody's going to bring a sheet or a blanket, and a lot of times if there's lawns, they're wet. But to have a way to sit in the landscaped areas but have a nice dry place to sit, I like that idea. Thanks.
I just have one more comment that I remembered as we were talking, and that is I'm just a little bit leery of the dimension of the narrowest dimension of the park. I think we saw on the slide it was about 115 feet wide, which sounds like it is a bit narrower than Doyle Hollis Park, and I'm just a little concerned about that. I think Doyle Hollis Park works really well, but I wouldn't really want it to be much narrower than it is. And I'm just also a little conscious of, you know, it just in looking at the overall layout, it looks a little bit like the park is getting squished, you know, by the other uses. It looks a little bit like it's getting squeezed, you know, in order to shoehorn in a Sprouts or a Whole Foods or whatever that market is going to be. You know, and I just say that because I've spent plenty of time doing that, you know, offset from the property line until you get what's left over, and that's where the park goes. So I want to make sure that doesn't happen and that we really get a usable park. Anything else? All right, well, I think then we will conclude that item. And we will move on to commissioner comments. Does anyone have any comments?
Good job.
I do have one comment. As we mentioned a couple times tonight about Scarlet City, which is a new coffee espresso cafe that's going to be opening on the corner of Adeline and Van Buren?
Yerba Buena.
Yerba Buena, thank you. It's in the corner of the Key Loft condos. Finally,
it's 39th on that side.
Yeah.
No,
it is 39th on that side, isn't it?
No, that's Yerba Buena.
Yeah, it's still Yerba Buena. Yeah, because I asked them when they. But anyway.
Yeah, Susanna said it's Yerba Buena.
Yeah,
okay.
but they're finally occupying that retail space that's been empty. It's going to be a very unique coffee shop that's not like anything around here. They have a very definite theme that they're going for. Susanna and Jen are the owners. They've been in the coffee business for years. Jen roasts her coffee actually on Wood Street and has for many, many years and sells it at Berkeley Bowl. So they're going to have a soft opening on the first week of August. They haven't set a date yet, but I would probably look somewhere around the first weekend of August. They're going to have a soft opening and wanted me to invite everyone to attend.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, if there are no other comments, then I think we will adjourn the meeting.